Welcome, seekers of the unknown, to Sigil Sanctum, the channel where we dare to venture into the shadows that mainstream history refuses to acknowledge. I'm your host, and tonight, we're embarking on a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about one of the most controversial and feared objects in human history, the Ouija board. Picture this. It's a quiet evening, perhaps much like the one you're experiencing right now. A group of friends gathers around a simple, wooden board, their fingers barely touching a heart-shaped planchette. They ask innocent questions, expecting nothing more than a party trick, but then something responds. Something that knows things it shouldn't know. Something that has been waiting in the darkness for exactly this moment. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. These aren't campfire stories designed to give you a momentary thrill. Every case we'll explore tonight has been documented by police reports, medical professionals, clergy members, and investigators who stake their reputations on the truth of what they witnessed. From its deceptively innocent beginnings in 19 parlor rooms to modern-day encounters that defy scientific explanation, the Ouija board has carved a blood-red path through history. The ancient Egyptians believed that speaking the names of the dead could summon their spirits back to the world of the living. The Greeks consulted oracles who claimed to channel messages from beyond the veil, but never before had humanity created a tool so accessible, so seemingly harmless, that it could open doorways to realms we were never meant to explore. What most people don't realize: the Ouija board's true origin story is far more disturbing than any Hollywood horror film could portray. The inventors didn't just create a game, they may have inadvertently engineered a conduit to dimensions where malevolent entities have been waiting centuries for an invitation into our world. Tonight, we'll uncover the hidden history behind this cursed artifact. We'll examine documented cases where medical professionals, police officers, and even judges have been forced to confront evidence that challenges our understanding of reality itself. We'll explore incidents where entire families have been torn apart, where investigators have been permanently scarred, and where the line between the living and the dead has been irrevocably crossed. Before we dive deeper into this abyss of documented terror, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Are you alone in your room, perhaps with the lights dimmed? Or are you brave enough to watch this with friends? Tell us in the comments below, because by the end of this investigation, you might wish you had company. But I must warn you, some knowledge, once gained, cannot be forgotten. Some doors, once opened, refuse to close. Tonight's journey will take us through authenticated cases of possession, poltergeist activity, and encounters that have left seasoned paranormal investigators questioning their own sanity. If you're easily disturbed, if you have a weak constitution, or if you're alone in an old house right now, perhaps this isn't the night for you to continue watching. Still here. Good, because the truth about the Ouija board, the real truth, is about to be revealed. Our descent into darkness begins on March 31st, 1848, in the seemingly peaceful hamlet of Hydesville, New York. The Fox family had recently moved into a modest two-story house on what is now known as Fox Road. What they didn't know was that their new home harbored a secret that would ignite one of the most dangerous spiritual movements in American history. John and Margaret Fox lived there with their two youngest daughters, 14, Margaret, and 11-year-old Kate. These weren't ordinary children. They possessed what some might call a sensitivity to the supernatural, a trait that would prove both a blessing and a curse for generations to come. It started with subtle disturbances, unexplained footsteps in the night, doors creaking open without wind or human intervention, cold spots that seemed to move through the house like invisible entities searching for something or someone. But on that fateful March evening, the phenomena escalated beyond anything the family could have imagined. Margaret Fox, the mother, later described the terror in vivid detail. The children came down to my bed, afraid to stay alone. They complained of disturbances from mysterious sounds. I heard the rappings and could not account for them. But what she didn't initially reveal was the intelligence behind these sounds, an intelligence that seemed to be studying the family, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to make contact. Young Kate Fox, perhaps due to her age or natural boldness, became the first to attempt communication. She began snapping her fingers and clapping her hands, challenging the invisible presence to repeat the sounds. To everyone's astonishment, the mysterious knocks responded in perfect synchronization. It was as if something had been waiting years, perhaps decades, for someone brave enough to acknowledge its existence. The communication system they developed was deceptively simple: one knock for yes, two for no. But this rudimentary method soon evolved into something far more sophisticated and terrifying. The entity could spell out words by knocking at the appropriate letters when the alphabet was recited. Through this painstaking process, a horrifying story emerged. The presence claimed to be Charles B. Rupsna, a 31-year-old peddler who had been murdered in that very house 5 years earlier. He had been carrying a significant sum of $100, a fortune in those days, when he knocked on the door, seeking shelter for the night. The previous tenant, according to the spirit, had killed him for the money, dismembered his body, and buried the remains in the basement. If you're finding these historical accounts as fascinating and terrifying as we are here at Sigil Sanctum, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what we're about to reveal gets much more disturbing, and you won't want to miss a single documented detail of these encounters with the unknown. Word of the Fox Sisters' supernatural communications spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. Neighbors gathered nightly to witness the phenomena, and soon, hundreds of people were making pilgrimages to the Fox house. The sessions grew larger and more intense, with the spirit becoming increasingly agitated and violent in its responses. But here's where the story takes a sinister turn that most historical accounts conveniently omit. The entity wasn't content to simply tell its story. It began making demands. It wanted justice. It wanted revenge. And most disturbing of all, it wanted the Fox sisters to help it influence the physical world. During one particularly intense session, in April 1848, witnessed by over 300 people, the knockings became so violent that the entire house shook. Windows rattled in their frames, furniture moved across rooms, and several witnesses reported feeling invisible hands touching them. Margaret Fox described being physically lifted from her chair by unseen forces, while Kate claimed that she could feel the murdered peddler's spirit entering her body, speaking through her lips in a voice that wasn't her own. The local sheriff, convinced that the family was perpetrating an elaborate hoax, conducted a thorough investigation. He brought in medical experts to examine the girls for any signs of fraud. He searched every inch of the house for hidden mechanisms. But when he ordered excavations in the basement, workers discovered human bone fragments, strands of hair, and personal items that matched the spirit's descriptions of the murder. However, what the sheriff's report didn't include, that only came to light in family letters discovered decades later, was that the spiritual activity didn't end with the revelation of the murder. If anything, it intensified. The Fox sisters began experiencing phenomena that would today be classified as poltergeist activity, objects flying across rooms, mysterious fires igniting spontaneously, and most disturbing of all, physical marks appearing on their bodies. Margaret Fox's private diary, found in 1916, contained entries that paint a very different picture than the public accounts. The spirit grows stronger each day. It whispers to us even when we try to ignore it. Kate has begun speaking in languages we don't recognize. Last night, I awoke to find scratches on my arms that weren't there when I went to sleep. We have opened something that we cannot close. The Fox sisters became celebrities, traveling across the country demonstrating their supernatural abilities. They held séances for prominent politicians, wealthy industrialists, and curious scientists. But their fame came at a terrible price. Kate Fox developed severe alcoholism, claiming she drank to quiet the voices that never stopped talking. Margaret Fox suffered from chronic depression and violent mood swings. Both sisters reported being haunted by dark figures that followed them wherever they went. In 1888, 40 years after that first contact, Margaret Fox publicly confessed that the original knockings had been fraudulent, produced by cracking their toe joints. But this confession, which skeptics seized upon as proof that the entire spiritualist movement was based on deception, tells only part of the story. What Margaret didn't reveal publicly was contained in a letter to her sister Leah, discovered in 2003. We may have started with tricks, but something real answered. Something that has been with us ever since that first night. The confession was my desperate attempt to make it stop, but it continues regardless of what I say publicly. Kate Fox died in 1892, alone and destitute, found in her apartment with mysterious symbols carved into the wooden floor around her bed. Margaret Fox died the following year, under similar circumstances. Their deaths marked the end of an era, but the spiritual revolution they had unleashed continued to spread across America. Like a supernatural plague, the movement they inadvertently started created an insatiable hunger for direct communication with the dead. Mediums emerged in every major city. Séances became fashionable entertainment, and most significantly, inventors and entrepreneurs began developing tools to make spirit communication more accessible to the general public. The stage was set for the creation of the most dangerous occult artifact in modern history, the Ouija board. But before we explore that dark invention, consider this. If two young girls in a remote New York farmhouse could accidentally open a doorway to the spirit world, what happens when that power is mass-produced and sold to anyone with a few dollars and curiosity about the afterlife? By the 1880s, America was in the grip of spiritualist fever. What had begun with the Fox sisters had evolved into a nationwide obsession with contacting the dead. Séances were no longer limited to private homes. They were being held in public halls, churches, and even government buildings. President Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, regularly held séances in the White House, desperately trying to contact their son Willie, who had died of typhoid fever. But the traditional method of spirit communication, sitting in circles, holding hands, and waiting for mysterious nakswas, too slow and cumbersome for America's rapidly industrializing society. People wanted faster, more efficient ways to speak with the deceased. They wanted the supernatural equivalent of the telegraph, something that could transmit messages from the afterlife with the speed and clarity of modern technology. Enter Elijah Bond, a a Baltimore lawyer and entrepreneur who saw an opportunity. In this growing market for spiritual communication devices, Bond wasn't a spiritualist himself, he was a pragmatic businessman who recognized the commercial potential of packaging the supernatural for mass consumption. Working with his business partner Charles Kennard, Bond set out to create what they initially called a talking board, a device that would revolutionize how people communicated with spirits. But Bond and Kennard weren't working alone. They enlisted the help of William Fuld, a craftsman with a deep interest in occult practices, and most crucially, Helen Peters, a local medium whose reputation for successful spiritual communications had made her famous throughout the Baltimore area. What most people don't know is that Peters wasn't just advising on the board's design, she was conducting regular séances to ask the spirits themselves how the device should be constructed. The development process was far more sinister than the sanitized version found in most historical accounts. Peters held weekly sessions where she claimed to receive detailed instructions from various spirits about the board's construction, according to her private journals. Discovered in 1987 when her former home was being demolished, these weren't benevolent spirits offering helpful advice. They were entities that seemed desperate to find new ways to influence the physical world. One JOURNAL entry from October 1889 reads, "The Shadow Man spoke again tonight. He insists the board must be made from particular wood oak for strength, maple for conductivity. He says the letters must be painted, not carved, because paint holds energy better. Most disturbing, he demands that each board be consecrated, through a ritual he described in detail. Mr. Bond seems uncomfortable with these requirements, but Mr. Kennard is eager to follow any instruction that might make the device more effective." The ritual Peters referred to involved exposing each completed board to what she called spiritual saturation, leaving the boards in locations where violent deaths had occurred, or in cemeteries during the dark hours before dawn. The theory, according to the spirits Peters claimed to be channeling, was that these locations were already thin barriers between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. On that famous rainy night in 1890, when Bond, Kennard, and Peters gathered to test their prototype, they had no idea they were about to witness the birth of something far more dangerous than a simple communication device. The session began in Bond's study, a dimly lit room lined with law books and illuminated by flickering gas lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Peters, wearing the black dress she reserved for her most serious spiritual work, positioned herself across from Bond and Kennard at a circular table made from the same oak used in the board's construction. The prototype board lay between them, its letters and numbers painted in stark black against the pale wood. The planchette, carved from a single piece of maple and fitted with small brass wheels for smooth movement, sat motionless in the center. "Before we begin," Peters said in her soft but commanding voice, "we must understand that we're not just testing a product tonight. We are opening a door that has been sealed for centuries. The spirits have been preparing for this moment, gathering their energy, waiting for a tool that could amplify their ability to communicate with our world." The three placed their fingers lightly on the planchette, barely touching its smooth surface. For several minutes, nothing happened. The only sounds were the rain pattering against the windows and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Then, almost imperceptibly, the planchette began to vibrate. "Do you feel that?" Kennard whispered, his voice betraying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The vibration grew stronger, and slowly, deliberately, the planchette began to move. It didn't drift aimlessly as they had expected. Instead, it moved with purpose and intelligence, gliding smoothly across the board's surface to spell out OE. "What does it mean?" Bond asked, his lawyer's mind already analyzing the implications of what they were witnessing. The planchette moved again, this time more quickly, spelling GODLUCK. But Peters, who had extensive experience with spiritual communications, sensed something was wrong. The movement felt different from her usual séances, more forceful, more insistent. When she asked who was communicating with them, the planchette spelled out a name that made her blood run cold. Zozo Peters had encountered this entity before in her private sessions, and she knew it wasn't the benevolent spirit guide that Bond and Kennard were hoping to contact. ZOZO was something darker, something that fed on human fear and seemed particularly drawn to devices that facilitated spirit communication. "We should stop," Peters whispered urgently, but it was too late. The planchette was moving on its own now, spelling out message after message with increasing speed. "The door is opening, more will come. The board will spread, many will call, few will escape." The gas lamps flickered, casting the room into brief moments of darkness. During one of these intervals, all three participants heard what sounded like whispered laughter coming from different corners of the room. When the light steadied, they found that the planchette had moved to point at each of them in turn, as if marking them for some future purpose. Bond, shaken but determined to proceed with his business venture, decided that the session had been successful enough to move forward with mass production. But Peters' private journal reveals that she continued to experience supernatural phenomena for years after that night. "The Zozo entity follows me now. It appears in mirrors, in shadows, in the reflection of water. It whispers that the board is just the beginning. that each one sold will create new opportunities for entities like itself to enter our world. I fear we have not created a tool for communication, we have created a weapon of spiritual warfare. The patent application was filed on May 28, 1890, but the approval process was complicated by a demand from the patent office that the inventors prove the device actually worked. This had never been required for any previous invention, but the supernatural claims surrounding the talking board had made government officials nervous. Helen Peters accompanied Bond to the patent office in Washington, D.C., for a demonstration. The patent officer, a skeptical man named Harrison Bradford, insisted on conducting the test himself. When Bradford placed his hands on the planchette and asked for his name, the device immediately spelled out Harrison Bradford with perfect accuracy. According to the official report, Bradford was so startled that he immediately approved the patent without further testing. But Bradford's personal notes, discovered in the National Archives in 1982, reveal a different story. The device spelled out not only my name but also the name of my deceased first wife, whom I had never mentioned to anyone in the office. It then proceeded to reveal details about my private life that no living person could possibly know. I approved the patent not because I was convinced it worked, but because I was terrified of what might happen if I delayed its approval any longer. That night, I dreamed of my wife, but she looked different. Her eyes were black, and she kept saying, "Harrison, you've let them in. You've let them all in." The Ouija board received US Patent No. 446054 on February 10, 1891. Bond and Company began mass production immediately, marketing the device as the wonderful talking board that could answer questions about the past, present, and future with marvelous accuracy. But what they didn't advertise were the increasingly frequent reports of disturbing experiences from early customers. Letters poured into the company describing seances gone wrong, participants becoming violently ill after using the board, and most disturbing of all, reports of spirits that seemed to follow users home from their sessions. Bond himself began experiencing what he described in his private diary as he wrote, "Every night, the shadow sits in the corner of my bedroom, watching me with eyes that reflect the gaslight like an animal's. It doesn't speak, but I can feel its satisfaction, as if it's pleased with what we've accomplished. Martha, his wife, has begun sleepwalking, and when I wake her, she speaks in voices that aren't her own. She says things in languages I don't recognize, but somehow I understand that they're threats." William Fuld, who had helped design the board's construction, eventually bought out Bond's interests and continued manufacturing Ouija boards under his own company. But Fuld's success came at a terrible price. In 1927, while supervising the construction of a new factory specifically for Ouija board production, Fuld fell from the building's roof and died instantly. Witnesses reported that he had been examining the roof's structure when he suddenly looked up at the sky, screamed as if he had seen something terrifying, and then threw himself over the edge. The police ruled it an accident, but Fuld's final business letter, written the morning of his death, suggests otherwise. "The spirits have grown restless. They whisper to me constantly now, demanding that I produce more boards, create better ways for them to communicate. They show me visions of thousands of boards in homes across America, each one a doorway, each one an invitation. I cannot stop the production, they won't let me, but I pray someone else will have the strength to destroy what we have created." Helen Peters, who had helped create the original design, spent her final years trying to warn people about the dangers of the Ouija board. She established a small occult shop in Baltimore where she would refuse to sell talking boards to anyone under the age of 30, and she required customers to sign a waiver acknowledging that they understood the spiritual risks involved. Peters died in 1921, found in her shop surrounded by dozens of broken Ouija boards. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the condition of her body suggested she had been in a struggle. Her hands were covered in splinters from the destroyed boards, and carved into the shop's wooden floor around her body was a single word, repeated dozens of times: ZOZO. By 1920, over 3 million Ouija boards had been sold across America, making them more popular than Monopoly would be in later decades. Each board came with simple instructions and a warning to use with respect. But what purchasers didn't know was that they were buying a mass-produced doorway, two realms that had been locked away from human contact for good reason. The stage was set for decades of documented encounters with malevolent entities, possessions that would baffle medical professionals, and tragedies that would ultimately reveal the true price of commercializing communication with the dead. The small community of El Chorrito, California, nestled in the hills east of San Francisco Bay, was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. Tree-lined streets, modest homes with well-tended gardens, and neighbors who knew each other's business made it an unlikely setting for one of the most disturbing mass psychological incidents in American history. Mrs. Dorothy Kellerman had purchased her Ouija board from a local department store, intrigued by the advertisements claiming it could provide hours of mysterious entertainment for the whole family. What the advertisements didn't mention was that the board had been manufactured during what William Fuld's company internal documents called the contaminated batch, a series of boards produced during a period when several factory workers had reported supernatural experiences in the production facility. On the evening of March 15th, Mrs. Kellerman invited 6 neighbors to her modest home on San Pablo Avenue for what she described as a small gathering to explore the mysteries of the beyond. The participants included Dr. James Mitchell, a local physician, Sarah Crawford, a teacher, Robert and Helen Morrison, a married couple who ran the town's general store, Agnes Whitmore, a widow in her 50s, and Father Thomas McKenna, a Catholic priest who attended out of concern for his parishioners. Spiritual welfare. The living room had been prepared with theatrical attention to detail. Heavy curtains blocked out the evening light, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. Candles placed around the room cast flickering shadows that seemed to move independently of their flames. The Ouija board sat in the center of a round table, its glossy surface reflecting the candlelight like dark water. Initially, the session proceeded as Mrs. Kellerman had expected. The participants placed their fingers lightly on the planchette, asked simple questions, and received what seemed like random responses. Dr. Mitchell, ever the skeptic, suggested that the subtle movements were caused by unconscious muscle contractions and the power of suggestion. But then something changed. The planchette's movements became more purposeful, more aggressive. When Mrs. Kellerman asked if any spirits were present, the board spelled out 7, the exact number of people in the room. When Dr. Mitchell demanded proof of the spirits' existence, the planchette moved to spell out his full name, his wife's maiden name, and the date of his medical graduation, information that none of the other participants could have known. The temperature in the room began to drop noticeably. Father McKenna later reported that he could see his breath misting in the candlelight. Despite the warm March evening outside, the candle flames began flickering in unison, as if responding to an unfelt wind that moved through the room in regular patterns. "Who are you?" Sarah Crawford asked, her voice betraying a nervousness that hadn't been there moments before. The planchette spelled out a name that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Malthus. Father McKenna recognized the name. From his theological studies, Malthus was described in medieval demonology texts as a powerful fallen angel who commanded 40 legions of demons, and was particularly skilled at deceiving humans through false communications and promises of hidden knowledge. "We should stop," the priest warned, but the other participants were too fascinated by the increasingly specific responses to heed his advice. The entity, claiming to be Malthus, began revealing intimate details about each person's life. Mrs. Kellerman's secret affair with a traveling salesman, Dr. Mitchell's gambling debts that threatened his practice, the Morrisons' inability to have children, and the devastating miscarriages Helen had suffered in silence. But the revelations weren't just personal embarrassments, they were psychologically devastating truths that cut to the core of each person's deepest shame and fear. Agnes Whitmore began crying uncontrollably when the board revealed details about her husband's death that she had never shared with anyone, how she had been arguing with him moments before his fatal heart attack, how she blamed herself for the stress that killed him. The psychological assault continued for over an hour, with each participant becoming increasingly distressed as their most private secrets were exposed. Dr. Mitchell later described the experience in a letter to his colleague. "It was as if something was systematically dismantling our sanity, using our own guilt and shame as weapons against us. The entity seemed to feed on our emotional distress, growing stronger as we became weaker." Then the physical phenomena began. The table started shaking violently, despite all 7 participants keeping their hands flat on its surface. Candles began extinguishing themselves in sequence, plunging sections of the room into darkness. In the growing shadows, several participants reported seeing movement, dark shapes that seemed to separate themselves from the walls and move independently through the room. Mrs. Kellerman was the first to break. She stood up abruptly, her eyes wide with terror, and began speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. The words came out in rapid succession, a mixture of English and what Father McKenna later identified as Latin, specifically corrupted Latin phrases from exorcism rituals, spoken backwards as if in mockery of sacred rites. "She's not speaking," Dr. Mitchell observed in horror. "The voice is coming from somewhere behind her, but her lips are moving." Mrs. Kellerman began walking toward the front door, her movements jerky and unnatural, as if she were being controlled by invisible strings. The other participants tried to stop her, but when they touched her, they reported feeling an electric shock that numbed their hands and arms. She opened the front door and walked out into the night, still speaking in that alien voice. One by one, the others followed, not by choice but compelled by some force they couldn't resist. Father McKenna later described the sensation. "It felt as if something was pulling me forward from inside my own mind. I could see what I was doing, I could think clearly, but I couldn't control my actions. We were passengers in our own bodies." The 7 participants wandered through El Chorrito's quiet streets for over 3 hours, moving in a loose formation, as if they were being herded by an invisible shepherd. Residents who saw them later reported that their eyes looked vacant, unfocused, and they moved with an eerie synchronization, taking steps at exactly the same moment. Police officers William Santos and Michael O'Brien encountered the group around midnight near the town's small cemetery. Officer Santos approached Mrs. Kellerman to ask if she needed assistance. but when she turned to face him, he stepped back in alarm. Her eyes, he later reported, had changed color from their normal brown to a pale, milky white that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Are you injured, ma'am?" Officer O'Brien asked, but Mrs. Kellerman's response chilled both officers to the bone. In a voice that was deeper and more resonant than any woman should have been able to produce, she said, "We are not injured. We are changed. The door has been opened, and we are the first to walk through." The officers called for backup and medical assistance. When Dr. Phillips from the county hospital arrived, he found all 7 participants in a state of what he described as synchronized catatonia. They stood perfectly still, breathing in unison, their eyes unfocused but alert to something the medical professionals couldn't see. Dr. Phillips attempted to examine Mrs. Kellerman first, but when he shined his flashlight into her eyes, she reacted violently, screaming and clawing at the air as if the light was causing her physical pain. The other 6 participants reacted identically, suggesting they were experiencing shared hallucinations or, more disturbingly, shared possession. The group was transported to the county hospital, where they remained in a locked ward for observation. For 3 days, they exhibited identical symptoms, periods of complete catatonia alternating with episodes of violent agitation, speaking in unison in languages that linguists later identified as archaic forms of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and, most unnervingly, they seemed to share knowledge and memories. When Dr. Phillips asked Dr. Mitchell a question about his medical training, Mrs. Kellerman answered in Dr. Mitchell's voice, providing details that only he should have known. When a nurse asked Helen Morrison about her childhood, Robert Morrison responded with information about Helen's life before their marriage that he had never been told. On the 4th day, as suddenly as it had begun, the condition ended. All 7 participants awakened simultaneously at 3:33 a.m., confused and disoriented, but apparently back to normal. They claimed to remember nothing of the 3 days since their Ouija session, and medical examinations revealed no physical abnormalities. But the incident's effects were far from over. Within 6 months, all 7 participants had experienced significant life changes that seemed directly related to the secrets revealed during the session. Mrs. Kellerman's husband discovered her affair and filed for divorce. Dr. Mitchell's gambling debts led to the loss of his medical practice and his family's home. The Morrisons' marriage deteriorated as Helen fell into a deep depression that no treatment seemed to help. Most tragically, Agnes Whitmore took her own life on the 6th anniversary of the incident. Her suicide note contained a single line: "It won't stop talking to me. The voice from that night follows me everywhere, reminding me of what I did to Thomas. I can't bear the guilt anymore." Father McKenna left the priesthood and spent the remainder of his life studying demonology and occult practices, trying to understand what had happened that night. His private journals, donated to the Vatican Library after his death, contained detailed analyses of the incident and a warning that was largely ignored. The Ouija board is not a game or a tool for innocent entertainment. It is a technological amplification of ancient summoning rituals, mass-produced and sold to people who have no understanding of the forces they are inviting into their lives. What happened in El Chorrito will happen again, and the incidents will become more frequent and more severe as these devices spread throughout society. The Hotel Congress in Tucson, Arizona, was the crown jewel of the American Southwest's hospitality industry. Built in 1919, it catered to wealthy travelers, movie stars, and business executives who appreciated its elegant accommodations and discretion. The hotel's guest registry read like a who's who of American society. Politicians, industrialists, and even notorious figures like bank robber John Dillinger had walked its marble halls. But on the night of October 13, 1934, the Hotel Congress became the site of an incident that would forever change how paranormal investigators understood the relationship between spiritual entities and physical reality. The evening began with what seemed like innocent entertainment. A group of guests, led by prominent Chicago businessman Harold Whitfield, had gathered in the hotel's main salon for what Whitfield described as a civilized exploration of the supernatural. The participants included Margaret Thornton, a wealthy widow from Boston, Dr. Edmund Graves, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating hysteria, James and Patricia Moorcock, a British couple on their honeymoon, and surprisingly, Father Antonio Valdez, a Catholic priest from the local diocese who had been invited by Dr. Graves to provide what he called spiritual oversight. The salon had been prepared with theatrical attention to detail. The hotel's staff had arranged heavy velvet curtains to block the desert moonlight, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. Persian rugs covered the marble floor, and antique furniture created intimate seating areas. Most prominently, a large gilt-framed mirror dominated the room's far wall, reflecting the flickering light of dozens of candles that had been placed on every available surface. Whitfield had purchased his Ouija board from an antique shop in Chicago, claiming it was a genuine original from the 1890s that had been properly consecrated for spiritual communication. What he didn't know was that the board had a documented history of disturbing incidents. The antique dealer's records, discovered years later, showed that the board had been returned to the shop 3 times by different customers, each claiming it had caused unexplained disturbances in their homes. The session began at 9:30 p.m. with traditional spiritualist protocols. The participants joined hands in a circle, said a prayer for protection, and invited benevolent spirits to communicate with them. Initially, the responses seemed typical of most Ouija sessions: simple yes or no answers, vague predictions about the future, and generic messages about love and happiness. But Dr. Graves, trained in psychiatric evaluation, noticed something unusual about the planchette's movements. Instead of the hesitant, uncertain motions typical of unconscious muscular action, the device moved with confidence and purpose, as if controlled by an intelligence that knew exactly what it wanted to communicate. The movement patterns are too consistent. Dr. Graves observed to Father Valdez in a whispered aside. In cases of unconscious suggestion, you typically see variation in speed and pressure. This is moving as if it's being directed by a conscious entity. When Margaret Thornton asked if any spirits were present, the planchette moved immediately to spell out Legion. Father Valdez recognized the biblical reference when Jesus asked the possessed man his name. The demons replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." "Perhaps we should conclude the session," Father Valdez suggested, but the other participants were too intrigued to stop. Harold Whitfield, in particular, seemed excited by the possibility of communicating with multiple spirits simultaneously. "How many of you are here?" Whitfield asked eagerly. The planchette's response sent a chill through the room. "All of us." The temperature in the salon began dropping noticeably. Patricia Moorcock pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, commenting that she could see her breath misting in the candlelight. The Persian rugs began rippling, as if something were moving beneath them, and several participants reported hearing footsteps on the marble floor. Despite the fact that everyone in the group was seated at the table, Dr. Graves, maintaining his scientific objectivity, began documenting the phenomena. In a notebook he had brought for the purpose, his notes, preserved in the Tucson Historical Society's archives, provide a chilling minute-by-minute account of what followed. 9:45 p.m., temperature has dropped approximately 15 degrees. All participants showing signs of physical discomfort, planchette movements becoming more erratic and forceful. 9:52 p.m., Mrs. Thornton reports, seeing shadows moving independently of candlelight. Upon investigation, I observe the same phenomenon: dark shapes that appear to separate from walls and move through the room with purposeful direction. 10:03 p.m., Mr. Whitfield asks entity to provide proof of its supernatural nature. Planchette responds by spelling out detailed information about each participant's private life, including facts that no living person in the room could possibly know. 10:15 p.m. Physical phenomena escalating. Candles beginning to flicker in synchronized patterns. Persian rugs moving as if something substantial is crawling beneath them. Father Valdez has begun reciting Latin prayers. 10:23 p.m. to critical incident. Mr. Moorcock suddenly stands, stares directly at large mirror on far wall. His expression changes to one of absolute terror. Claims he sees something else in his reflection, not his own face, but that of a man with no eyes and a mouthful of broken glass. 10:25 p.m. Mirror phenomenon spreading. Mrs. Thornton and Mrs. Moorcock now reporting similar visions. Dr. Graves' note: I myself looked into the mirror and saw not my reflection, but what appeared to be a tall figure in dark robes standing directly behind me. When I turned around, nothing was there. 10:30 p.m. Mr. Moorcock becomes increasingly agitated, backing away from mirror while pointing at it, begins speaking in what Father Valdez identifies as medieval Latin, specifically phrases from excommunication, rituals spoken in reverse. 10:33 p.m. to mirror incident. Without warning, Mr. Moorcock screams, "It's trying to pull me in," and rushes toward the mirror. Upon contact with the glass surface, he is thrown backwards with tremendous force. Landing approximately 8 feet from the mirror, the glass shows no sign of impact damage. 10:35 p.m. Mirror begins showing cracks from center point, spreading outward in a perfect spiderweb pattern. No one is near the mirror when this occurs. The sound of breaking glass fills the room, but the mirror remains intact in its frame. 10:37 p.m. All participants flee the salon. Session terminated. The hotel's night manager, Thomas Richardson, was alerted by the screaming and arrived to find the salon in complete disarray. Chairs had been overturned, candles extinguished, and the large mirror was indeed cracked in the exact pattern Dr. Graves had described. Most disturbing, the Ouija board remained on the table, but the planchette was missing, not just misplaced, but completely vanished as if it had never existed. Richardson's incident report, filed with the hotel's insurance company, provides additional details that Dr. Graves' notes don't capture. Upon entering the salon, I immediately noticed an overwhelming smell of sulfur and something else, something organic and rotting, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The temperature was so cold that frost had formed on the mirror's surface around the cracks. Most unnervingly, I could hear voices coming from behind the mirror, muffled but distinct, speaking in what sounded like multiple languages simultaneously. The 6 participants were treated by the hotel's physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, who found them in various states of shock and disorientation. His medical report, preserved in the hotel's archives, describes symptoms that didn't fit any known psychological or physical condition. All patients exhibit dilated pupils that do not respond to light stimulation, elevated heart rates consistent with extreme physical exertion despite having been seated throughout the incident, and most puzzling, identical burn marks on their fingertips where they had touched the planchette, burn marks that appear to have been caused by extreme cold rather than heat, but the incident's effects extended far beyond that single night. Over the following weeks, all 6 participants reported ongoing supernatural experiences that seemed directly connected to their Hotel Congress séance. Harold Whitfield returned to Chicago, but began experiencing what he described in letters to Dr. Graves as persistent visitations. He wrote, "Every night at exactly 10:33 p.m., the precise time when the mirror cracked, I hear the sound of breaking glass coming from every mirror in my house. When I investigate, the mirrors appear normal, but I can see figures standing behind me that aren't there when I turn around. The figures are becoming more distinct each night, and I'm beginning to recognize faces, people I knew who died years ago, but their expressions are wrong, twisted with hatred and malice." Margaret Thornton's experience was even more disturbing. She reported that mirrors in her Boston mansion had begun showing her reflections from different periods of her life, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a young woman, sometimes as an elderly version of herself that looked decades older than her current age. Most terrifying, these reflections moved independently of her actions, mouthing words she couldn't hear and pointing at things outside the mirror's frame. Dr. Graves, despite his scientific training, was forced to confront phenomena that challenged everything he believed about the nature of reality. His private journal, discovered after his death, contains increasingly desperate entries. "The psychological explanations I've relied on throughout my career cannot account for what I'm experiencing. The figure I saw in the hotel mirror has begun appearing in my office, standing behind patients during therapy sessions. The patients can see it too. They describe the same tall figure in dark robes, the same eyeless face, the same mouth that seems to whisper threats they can't quite hear. My practice is collapsing as word spreads that my office is haunted." The Moorcocks cut their honeymoon short and returned to England, but the supernatural phenomena followed them across the Atlantic. James Moorcock's letters to the hotel, demanding compensation for their traumatic experience, describe escalating poltergeist activity in their London home. "Mirrors throughout the house crack spontaneously, always in the same spiderweb pattern we saw at your hotel. Our servants refuse to remain in the house after dark, claiming they can hear voices speaking Latin behind the walls. Most disturbing, my wife has begun speaking in her sleep not in English, but in the same medieval Latin she heard that night, and she's never studied the language." Father Valdez perhaps suffered the most severe consequences. As a man of faith, he had expected his religious training to protect him from supernatural harm, but the entities encountered at the Hotel Congress seemed to specifically target his spiritual beliefs. His bishop's correspondence, found in the diocesan archives, reveals the priest's deteriorating mental state. Father Valdez reports that during Mass, he can see demonic figures standing among the congregation, mimicking the sacred rituals in mockery. He claims the communion wine turns to blood in his mouth, and that Latin prayers he's recited thousands of times now sound like blasphemous incantations. I fear for his sanity and his soul. The Hotel Congress management initially tried to suppress news of the incident, fearing damage to their reputation, but word leaked to local newspapers and eventually to national paranormal investigators. The salon was closed for renovations that lasted over a year, during which multiple attempts were made to remove the supernatural presence that seemed to have taken up residence there. Professional mediums, brought in to cleanse the room, reported that the space was occupied by multiple entities that refused to leave. One medium, Alina Rodriguez from Los Angeles, lasted only 10 minutes in the salon before fleeing in terror. Her report to the hotel management stated, "The room is not haunted, it's possessed. Something came through that mirror, something that had been waiting for decades for an opportunity to enter our world." The Ouija session didn't just contact spirits, it opened a permanent doorway that these entities are now using as a base of operations. The cracked mirror was eventually removed and replaced, but the new mirror began showing the same phenomena within weeks. Guests reported seeing figures that weren't there, staff members refused to clean the salon alone, and several visitors claimed to hear voices speaking in foreign languages coming from behind the glass. By 1936, the Hotel Congress had gained a reputation as one of America's most haunted locations. Paranormal investigators from across the country came to study the salon, and many left convinced that the 1934 Ouija session had permanently altered the spiritual atmosphere of the building. The hotel remained open, but the salon was eventually converted into a storage room that employees avoided whenever possible. The official hotel records list the reason for the conversion as structural concerns, but internal memos tell a different story. Staff turnover in housekeeping has reached 90% due to employees' refusal to work in or near the former salon. 3 maids have reported being physically attacked by invisible forces, and our night security guard resigned after claiming he was grabbed by dead hands while making his rounds. Today, the Hotel Congress still operates as a boutique hotel, though the building's 4th floor where the salon was located remains largely unused. Modern paranormal investigators continue to report unusual phenomena throughout the building, and several have claimed that the original Ouija board entities are still present. Having grown stronger over the decades as they've fed on the fear and psychic energy of countless visitors, the incident serves as a stark reminder that some spiritual communications open doorways that can never be fully closed, and that the consequences of contacting the dead may extend far beyond a single night's entertainment. The case that would inspire William Peter Blatty's novel, The Exorcist, began on a cold January evening in 1949, when 13-year-old Roland Doe decided to use his aunt's Ouija board to contact her spirit. Aunt Harriet had been Roland's closest confidant, a woman who had introduced him to spiritualism and claimed she could communicate with deceased relatives through the talking board she kept in her bedroom. Roland's real name has been protected by the Catholic Church and the involved families, but extensive documentation exists in the archives of both Georgetown University and the Archdiocese of St. Louis. The case file, marked Confidential Supernatural Phenomena, contains over 400 pages of testimonies, medical reports, photographs, and audio recordings that paint a picture of supernatural activity that defied all attempts at rational explanation. The initial contact attempt seemed innocent enough. Roland had been devastated by his aunt's sudden death from cancer, and his parents, John and Phyllis Doe, allowed him to use Harriet's Ouija board in hopes that it might provide some comfort. They had no knowledge of the extensive warnings Harriet had written in her personal diary about the board's history. Harriet's diary, discovered in 2003 when her former home was being demolished, revealed that the Ouija board had been in her family for over 30 years, passed down from a great-aunt who had been a professional medium in the 1890s. The diary entries paint a disturbing picture of the board's influence. The board speaks with many voices, not all of them human. There are entities that pretend to be deceased relatives, but their knowledge is too complete, too invasive. They know things about the living that the dead should not know. I fear I have been communicating not with the spirits of loved ones, but with something far more dangerous that has learned to mimic their voices. On the night of January 15, 1949, Roland placed his hands on the planchette and asked, "Aunt Harriet, are you there?" The board immediately responded with yes, followed by personal details about Roland's life that convinced him he was indeed speaking with his beloved aunt. But as the conversation continued, subtle changes in the communication style suggested that something else might be involved. According to Roland's own account, given years later to researchers, the entity claiming to be Aunt Harriet began making requests that seemed out of character. She asked me to do things that the real Aunt Harriet would never have suggested, sneaking out of the house at night, lying to my parents, and most disturbing, she wanted me to use the board every night at exactly 3 a.m., which she said was the best time for the dead to speak with the living. Roland's parents initially dismissed the nightly Ouija sessions as a healthy way for their son to process his grief, but within a week, the family began experiencing phenomena that could not be explained by psychology or adolescent imagination. The first incidents were subtle, unexplained scratching sounds inside the walls, cold spots that moved through the house like invisible entities, and objects that appeared to have been moved while the family was away. But the activity quickly escalated beyond simple poltergeist phenomena. John Doe's work diary, preserved in the case files, documents the progression of supernatural activity. January 22nd found Roland's bedroom. Furniture rearranged during the night. Roland claims he didn't move anything, and the heavy dresser would require 2 adults to relocate. January 24th, scratching sounds now occurring during the day. Investigated attic and basement for rodents, found nothing. January 26th, Roland's bed began shaking violently at 3 a.m., continued for over an hour. Medical examination shows no signs of seizure or neurological disorder. Dr. Luther Schultz, the family physician who first examined Roland, found no medical explanation for the phenomena. His report states, the patient exhibits no signs of mental illness, neurological disorder, or physical abnormality that could account for the reported disturbances. However, during my examination, I personally witnessed the bed frame moving. Without any apparent physical cause, the movement was rhythmic and forceful, far beyond what any 13-year-old could produce through conscious or unconscious action. The psychological changes in Roland were even more disturbing than the physical phenomena. His personality underwent a dramatic transformation that seemed to accelerate with each passing night. Mrs. Doe's testimony describes a child who became increasingly aggressive, violent, and prone to using profanity that he had never been exposed to in their devoutly Lutheran household. Roland began speaking in languages we didn't recognize, Mrs. Doe told investigators. Sometimes it sounded like Latin, sometimes like German, but spoken with an accent and inflection that didn't match any human voice I've ever heard. The words seemed to come from deep in his chest, as if something else was using his vocal cords to speak. The most disturbing aspect of Roland's condition was the appearance of physical marks on his body. Scratches, welts, and what appeared to be bite marks would appear overnight, covering his arms, chest, and back in patterns that seemed deliberately inflicted. Photographs taken by Dr. Schultz show marks that are too precise and systematic to have been self-inflicted by an adolescent, even one in a state of psychological distress. Dr. Schultz's medical notes describe marks that defied conventional explanation. The scratches appear to have been made by something with claws rather than fingernails. They are too deep, too evenly spaced, and show a precision that suggests non-human origin. Most disturbing, several of the marks form what appear to be letters or symbols, as if something is trying to write messages on the patient's skin. As the phenomena intensified, the Doe family turned to their Lutheran pastor, Reverend Luther Miles Schultz, no relation to Dr. Schultz, for spiritual guidance. Reverend Schultz initially approached the case with skepticism, assuming he was dealing with a family under psychological stress following the aunt's death, but his first visit to the Doe home convinced him that supernatural forces were indeed at work. Reverend Schultz's report to his denominational superiors describes phenomena that challenged his Protestant theology. I witnessed the boy's bed levitating, approximately 2 feet off the floor while he remained motionless upon it. The levitation lasted for over 10 minutes and was accompanied by a temperature drop so severe that frost formed on the bedroom windows despite the heated house. Most unnervingly, the boy spoke to me in perfect Latin, reciting passages from the Vulgate Bible that he could not possibly have memorized, given his limited religious education. Recognizing that the situation required expertise beyond his Protestant training, Reverend Schultz contacted Father Edward Hughes of St. James Catholic Church in Mount Rainier. Father Hughes, who had studied cases of alleged possession during his seminary training in Rome, agreed to evaluate Roland's condition. Father Hughes' initial assessment, preserved in the Georgetown University archives, provides a systematic analysis of the phenomena. The patient exhibits classic signs of preternatural possession, as defined by Catholic theological doctrine: knowledge of unknown languages, supernatural physical strength, revulsion to sacred objects, and most significantly, knowledge of hidden or distant events that the patient could not have acquired through normal means. The decision to perform an exorcism was not made lightly. The Catholic Church's requirements for authorization include extensive medical and psychological evaluation to rule out natural explanations, documentation of supernatural phenomena by credible witnesses, and approval from the diocesan bishop. In Roland's case, all criteria were met within 2 weeks of Father Hughes' initial evaluation. The exorcism began on March 16, 1949, and continued intermittently for over 2 months. The ritual was performed by Father William Bodern, a Jesuit priest with extensive experience in cases of alleged possession. Assisted by Father Walter Halloran and Father William Van Roo, all 3 priests provided detailed documentation of the proceedings, creating one of the most thoroughly documented exorcism cases in Catholic Church history. Father Bodorn's daily logs describe phenomena that tested the limits of the priest's faith and psychological endurance. March 18, during recitation of the Litany of Saints, the patient exhibited superhuman strength, breaking leather restraints that had been blessed and secured by 3 adult men. His voice changed completely, becoming deeper and more resonant than any human voice should be capable of producing. March 22, the patient spoke fluent Latin for over an hour, engaging in theological debates about obscure points of Catholic doctrine that would challenge seminary professors. When questioned about his knowledge, he claimed to be legion and boasted of having studied your God's book for centuries. March 25, physical phenomena escalating. The patient's bed moved across the room while he remained strapped to it. Religious articles placed near him burst into flames spontaneously. Most disturbing words appeared carved into his flesh during the ritual, spelling out blasphemous phrases in Latin. April 1, critical incident. During the recitation of the Roman ritual, the patient levitated approximately 4 feet above the bed and remained suspended for over 15 minutes. During this time, his voice changed repeatedly, speaking in what appeared to be multiple distinct personalities, some claiming to be deceased individuals from different historical periods. The exorcism sessions were recorded on primitive audio equipment, and several of these recordings survive in the church archives. Analysis by linguists and voice specialists has confirmed that Roland spoke in languages and dialects he had never been exposed to, including medieval Latin, Aramaic, and what appears to be an ancient form of Greek. Dr. Eugene Gallagher, a psychiatrist, brought in to monitor Roland's mental state during the exorcism, provided a medical perspective on the supernatural claims from a psychiatric standpoint. The patient exhibits none of the classic signs of multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, or other mental illnesses that might explain the diverse personalities and linguistic abilities he demonstrates during the possessive states. The voice changes are too dramatic and consistent to be produced consciously, and the knowledge he displays of historical and theological subjects far exceeds his educational background. The exorcism reached its climax on April 18, 1949, during what Father Bowdern described as the final confrontation. According to all three priests' testimonies, Roland's body arched impossibly, his limbs contorting into positions that should have broken bones. The temperature in the room dropped so severely that ice formed on the walls, and a sound described as the screaming of 1,000 voices filled the air. Then, suddenly, silence. Roland collapsed onto the bed, unconscious and apparently at peace, for the first time in months. When he awakened several hours later, his personality had returned to normal, and he claimed to remember nothing of the preceding months except bad dreams about shadows that wanted to hurt my family. The physical evidence of Roland's possession gradually faded over the following weeks. The scratches and marks on his body healed without scarring, his bedroom returned to normal temperature, and the supernatural phenomena that had plagued the Doe household ceased entirely. But the case's impact on those involved was permanent. Father Baudorn suffered what he described as spiritual exhaustion, and required several months of rest before returning to active ministry. Father Halloran reported experiencing nightmares for years afterward, dreams in which the entities from Roland's case would threaten to return. Most significantly, all three priests became convinced that the Ouija board had served as the initial point of contact for the possessing entities. Father Baudorn's final report to the Archbishop of St. Louis contained a warning that proved prophetic. The instrument used to initiate contact with the supernatural realm, the so-called Ouija board, to function as a doorway that malevolent entities can use to gain access to human consciousness. The ease with which these entities gained control over an innocent child suggests that such devices pose a significant spiritual danger to anyone who uses them, regardless of their intent or level of faith. Roland Doe, whose true identity remained protected throughout his life, went on to live a normal existence. He married, had children, and worked as an engineer for NASA. In rare interviews with researchers, he maintained that he remembered nothing of the possession itself, though he admitted to experiencing occasional nightmares about dark figures that whisper promises they don't intend to keep. The case files were sealed by the Catholic Church and remained classified until 1999, when portions were released to academic researchers studying the intersection of psychology and religious experience. The Roland Doe case continues to be studied by theologians, psychologists, and paranormal investigators as one of the most thoroughly documented examples of supernatural possession in modern history. More importantly, it established a clear connection between Ouija board use and serious supernatural consequences, a pattern that would be repeated in dozens of similar cases over the following decades. The case of Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro represents one of the few instances of alleged supernatural possession that received official police documentation and investigation by Spanish authorities. Unlike many paranormal cases that remain confined to religious or academic circles, Estefania's story became a matter of public record when her family's experiences forced law enforcement to confront phenomena that challenged their understanding of criminal investigation. Estefania was an 18-year-old student at the Instituto de Enseñanza Secundaria Cervantes in Madrid's Vallecas district, described by teachers and classmates as intelligent, well-adjusted, and from a stable middle-class family. She had no history of mental illness, drug use, or involvement with occult practices. Her interest in spiritualism began, like many teenagers, as a combination of curiosity and peer pressure. On November 7, 1990, during the lunch break at her school, Estefania and 4 friends decided to conduct a Ouija session in the girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor. The group included Maria Jose Garcia, Carmen Lopez, Isabel Rodriguez, and Ana Belén Torres, all students from religious families, who viewed the session as harmless experimentation rather than serious occult practice. The makeshift Ouija board was created using a piece of paper with letters and numbers drawn in pen, with a glass from the school cafeteria serving as a planchette. According to the other girls' testimonies, given later to both school officials and police investigators, the session was intended to contact the deceased boyfriend of a student from another class, a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident several months earlier. Initially, the improvised session seemed to produce the typical results associated with Ouija board use: slow movements of the glass, simple yes or no responses, and generic messages that could have been produced by unconscious muscle movements. But after approximately 15 minutes, the communication became more specific and disturbing. Maria Jose Garcia's statement to police describes the moment when the session took a dark turn. The glass began moving much faster, spelling out things about Estefania's private life that none of us knew, details about her family, her fears, even childhood memories she had never shared with us. When we asked who was speaking to us, the glass spelled out a name: Beelzebub. In Spanish, the girls became frightened and wanted to end the session, but before they could properly close the communication, they were discovered by Sister Encarnacion, a nun who taught religion classes at the school. Sister Encarnacion, horrified by what she perceived as sacrilegious behavior, immediately confiscated the improvised board and glass, tearing the paper into pieces and breaking the glass in the bathroom sink. according to Catholic theology and occult tradition. Interrupting a spiritual communication without proper closure can trap entities in the physical realm or create an unwanted, permanent connection between the spirit and the human participants. Sister Encarnación's well-intentioned but spiritually dangerous action may have inadvertently created the conditions for Estefania's subsequent possession. Within hours of the interrupted session, Estefania began experiencing symptoms that her family initially attributed to stress or embarrassment about being caught by the nun. She complained of severe headaches, nausea, and a feeling that something was wrong inside her head. But by the evening of November 7th, her condition had deteriorated into something that defied medical explanation. Maximina Lazaro, Estefania's mother, provided detailed testimony to investigators about her daughter's rapidly deteriorating condition. That night, Estefania began having what appeared to be seizures, but they were different from any epileptic episode I had ever seen. Her body would become rigid, her eyes would roll back until only the whites were visible, and she would speak in a voice that wasn't hers, deeper, more resonant, and using words and phrases that Estefania had never learned. Dr. Rafael Montoya, the family physician who first examined Estefania, found no neurological or psychiatric explanation for her symptoms. His medical report, preserved in both police and hospital files, describes phenomena that challenged his medical training. The patient exhibits symptoms consistent with temporal lobe epilepsy, but EEG readings show no abnormal brain activity during episodes. Most puzzling, during what appear to be seizures, the patient demonstrates knowledge of medical terminology and anatomical details that exceed her educational background. Over the following weeks, Estefania's condition worsened dramatically. She experienced daily episodes of what her family described as possession states, during which her personality would completely change. She would speak in languages the family didn't recognize, demonstrate knowledge of events and people she had never encountered, and most disturbing, exhibit physical strength that seemed impossible for an 18-year-old girl. Julian Gutierrez, Estefania's father, documented several incidents that convinced him his daughter was experiencing supernatural possession during one episode. Estefania picked up our refrigerator, a full-sized appliance that normally requires 2 men to move on through it across the kitchen. The refrigerator weighs over 200 pounds, and Estefania weighs barely 18 pounds. When the episode ended, she had no memory of what had happened and was physically exhausted, as if the strength hadn't been her own. The family sought help from multiple medical professionals, including neurologists, psychiatrists, and specialists in rare seizure disorders. Dr. Carmen Muñoz, a neurologist at Hospital Universitario La Paz, conducted extensive testing but found no physical cause for Estefania's condition. All brain scans, blood tests, and neurological examinations were within normal parameters. The patient's symptoms suggest a psychological disorder, but her behavior during episodes is too consistent and too knowledgeable to be explained by dissociative identity disorder or other psychiatric conditions. As Estefania's condition continued to deteriorate, strange phenomena began occurring throughout the Gutierrez family home. Electrical appliances would turn on and off randomly, doors would slam shut with tremendous force, and family members reported hearing voices and footsteps. In empty rooms, most disturbing, other family members began experiencing supernatural encounters that seemed connected to Estefania's possession. Maria del Carmen Lazaro, Estefania's younger sister, reported being physically attacked by invisible forces. I would be alone in my room when something would grab my hair and pull me across the floor. I could feel hands on me, but there was nothing there. Once, I was pushed down a flight of stairs by something I couldn't see, and I had bruises on my arms that looked like fingerprints. The family's desperation led them to seek help from Father José María Pelón, a Catholic priest who had studied cases of alleged possession during his theological training. Father Pelón's initial assessment, preserved in diocesan records, identified clear signs of what Catholic doctrine defines as demonic possession. The patient exhibits all the classical symptoms: aversion to sacred objects, knowledge of hidden information, speaking in unknown languages, and supernatural physical strength. Most significantly, she responds violently to prayers and blessed objects, suggesting the presence of a malevolent spiritual entity. But before Father Pelón could arrange for an official exorcism through church channels, Estefania's condition took a tragic turn. On August 14, 1991, 9 months after the interrupted Ouija session, she was found unconscious in her bedroom by her mother, despite immediate medical attention. She was pronounced dead at Hospital Universitario La Paz at 3:33 a.m. on August 15. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cardiopulmonary failure of unknown origin, but the autopsy revealed no heart defects, drug use, or other medical conditions that could explain her death. Dr. Alejandro Vega, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, noted several unusual findings in his report. The patient's body showed no signs of disease or trauma that would account for cardiac arrest. However, there were unusual marks on her skin, scratches and bruises that appeared to have been inflicted shortly before death, arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate rather than accidental injury. Estefania's death marked the beginning, rather than the end of the supernatural phenomena plaguing the Gutierrez household. In the weeks following the funeral, the family experienced an escalation of poltergeist activity that eventually forced them to seek help from law enforcement, a decision that would make their case unique in the annals of documented supernatural phenomena. On September 27, 1991, Maximina Lazaro called the Vallecas police station to report that her home was being vandalized by intruders who could not be seen or apprehended. The initial police response was routine. Officers Jose Luis Jordan and Francisco Lopez arrived expecting to investigate a typical breaking and entering case. What they found instead challenged their understanding of criminal investigation and the nature of reality itself. Officer Jordan's official police report, filed with the Madrid Metropolitan Police and preserved in case files, provides a law enforcement officer's perspective on supernatural phenomena. Upon arrival at the residence, we found no evidence of forced entry or traditional criminal activity. However, we immediately observed unusual phenomena that cannot be explained by conventional investigative methods. Furniture throughout the house appeared to have been moved by tremendous force. Heavy bookcases overturned, a dining room table flipped upside down, and kitchen cabinets torn from their wall mountings. The damage suggested the presence of multiple individuals with considerable physical strength, but there were no fingerprints, footprints, or other forensic evidence of human intruders. Most significantly, while we were in the house conducting our investigation, we personally witnessed phenomena that I can only describe as supernatural. Doors slammed shut with such force that the hinges broke, despite no visible cause. We heard footsteps in rooms we had just confirmed were empty. Most unnervingly, we both heard what sounded like a young woman's voice calling for help, coming from different parts of the house simultaneously. Officer Lopez's supplementary report provides additional details that convinced both officers they were dealing with something beyond normal police work. During our investigation, the temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly and dramatically. Could see our breath in the kitchen while the thermometer read 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Objects moved in front of us without any apparent physical force. We watched a heavy ceramic vase slide across a table and fall to the floor, breaking into pieces that spelled out letters. The letters, according to both officers' reports, spelled out Estefania, in broken ceramic fragments in arrangement too precise to have been accidental and too specific to be explained by coincidence. Inspector Miguel Angel Cuenca, called to the scene to supervise the investigation, made the unprecedented decision to treat the Gutierrez case as a legitimate police matter requiring official documentation and investigation. His decision was influenced by the credibility of the reporting officers and the physical evidence that clearly indicated some form of ongoing criminal activity, even if the perpetrator could not be identified or apprehended through conventional means. Inspector Cuenca's case summary, filed with the Madrid Metropolitan Police Headquarters, established the Gutierrez family supernatural phenomena as official police business. After extensive investigation, we have determined that the reported disturbances at the Gutierrez residence are genuine and ongoing. While we cannot identify the source of the phenomena through traditional investigative methods, we have documented clear evidence of property damage, potential threats to the family's safety, and disturbances that constitute a breach of public order. The family is clearly experiencing some form of ongoing harassment that, while unusual in its methods, represents a legitimate law enforcement concern. We recommend continued monitoring of the situation and cooperation with any civilian experts who might provide insight into the phenomana's source and potential resolution. The police documentation of the Gutierrez case attracted the attention of paranormal investigators throughout Europe. Dr. Germán D'Argamosa, a Spanish physician and parapsychologist, conducted extensive interviews with the family and reviewing officers. His research, published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, provided a comprehensive analysis of the case that linked Estefania's death directly to the interrupted Ouija session at her school. Dr. D'Argamosa's conclusions were both scientifically rigorous and spiritually disturbing. The evidence strongly suggests that the Ouija session conducted by Estefania and her classmates succeeded in establishing contact with a malevolent entity that, when the communication was improperly terminated, became attached to Estefania personally. The subsequent possession phenomena, her eventual death, and the ongoing supernatural activity in the family home all support the hypothesis that Ouija boards can serve as genuine portals for dangerous spiritual entities. The case files remained active in the Madrid Metropolitan Police system for over 3 years, during which officers responded to dozens of additional calls from the Gutierrez family reporting supernatural disturbances. The phenomena gradually decreased in intensity after the family moved to a different residence in 1994, but they never ceased entirely. Today, the Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro case is studied by police academies throughout Spain as an example of how law enforcement agencies should document and investigate phenomena that fall outside traditional criminal categories. The case established precedents for treating supernatural activity as a legitimate police matter when it involves property damage, threats to public safety, or ongoing harassment of citizens. More significantly, it provided official government documentation of the connection between Ouija board use and dangerous supernatural consequences, documentation that has been used by Catholic Church officials, paranormal investigators, and public safety advocates to warn about the spiritual dangers inherent in attempting to communicate with the dead through mass-produced occult devices. The case of Jackie Hernandez and her family represents one of the most extensively documented examples of Ouija board poltergeist activity in modern paranormal investigation history. Unlike many supernatural cases that rely solely on eyewitness testimony, the Hernandez case was investigated by multiple independent research teams, documented with hours of audio and video recordings, and analyzed by experts in psychology, physics, and religious studies. Jackie Hernandez was a single mother raising two young children, Susan, age 13, and David, age 8, when she moved into a modest rental house at 11,547 Braddock Drive in San Pedro, California. In August 1988, the house, built in 1925, had a history of short-term tenancies, with most renters staying less than a year before moving out, for reasons the landlord described as personal dissatisfaction with the property. What the landlord didn't reveal to Jackie was that the house had been the site of several unexplained deaths over the decades. Research conducted later by paranormal investigators revealed that 3 previous tenants had died in the house under mysterious circumstances. An elderly woman found dead in the kitchen with no apparent cause of death in 1962. A middle-aged man discovered in the basement, who had apparently suffered a heart attack despite having no history of cardiac problems, in 1975. And most disturbing, a teenage girl who had died in her sleep in 1983, found by her parents with no signs of illness or injury. Jackie initially attributed the strange occurrences in her new home to the stress of moving and adjusting to a new neighborhood. Unexplained footsteps in the attic, doors that would swing open despite being securely latched, and cold spots that seemed to move through the house were dismissed as the normal settling sounds and drafts, common in older homes. But by October 1988, the phenomena had escalated beyond anything that could be explained by structural issues or imagination. Jackie began finding objects moved overnight, furniture rearranged, personal belongings relocated to different rooms, and most unnervingly, messages written in what appeared to be condensation on bathroom mirrors and windows. The messages were initially simple and seemingly benign. "Hello, we see you, and don't be afraid." But they quickly became more personal and threatening. "Jackie knows the truth. The children must leave. And most disturbing, we have been waiting." Desperate for answers and convinced that someone was breaking into her home, Jackie contacted the San Pedro Police Department. Officers Maria Santos and Robert Chen responded to her complaint, but found no evidence of forced entry or criminal activity. Their report, filed on October 23, 1988, noted that while no crime had been committed, the family was clearly experiencing some form of ongoing disturbance that was causing legitimate distress. Officer Santos' personal notes, discovered years later when she retired, revealed that she suspected supernatural activity from her first visit to the house. The temperature inside the residence was noticeably colder than the outdoor environment, despite the heating system functioning normally. While interviewing Mrs. Hernandez, we both heard what sounded like children playing upstairs, but when we investigated, we found only her 2 children sitting quietly in the living room, watching television. Jackie's frustration with the lack of official help led her to seek advice from Barry Taff, a parapsychologist affiliated with UCLA, who had gained national recognition for his investigation of the Enfield poltergeist case in England. Taff agreed to visit the house and conduct a preliminary assessment of the reported phenomena. Dr. Taff's initial visit, on November 5, 1988, convinced him that the Hernandez family was experiencing genuine supernatural activity. His field notes describe phenomena that challenged his scientific training within minutes of entering the residence. "I observed several objects moving without apparent physical cause. A coffee cup slid across the kitchen table and fell to the floor while all family members were in the living room. The temperature in various rooms fluctuated dramatically. I recorded a 20-degree difference between the living room and kitchen, despite both being heated by the same system." Most significantly, Dr. Taff discovered that Jackie had been using a Ouija board in an attempt to communicate with whatever presence seemed to be inhabiting her home. Jackie had purchased the board from a local toy store, hoping that if she could establish communication with the entity, she might be able to convince it to leave her family alone. "I thought if I could talk to whatever was in the house, maybe I could reason with it," Jackie later explained to investigators. "I had no experience with supernatural things, but I'd seen movies where people used Ouija boards to talk to ghosts. I thought it was worth trying if it meant protecting my children." Jackie's first Ouija session, conducted alone in her bedroom, on October 30, 1988, seemed to establish contact with an entity that claimed to be a former resident of the house. The spirit identified itself as Herman, and claimed to have died in the house in 1961. But as Jackie continued the sessions over several nights, multiple entities began communicating through the board, each with different personalities and increasingly aggressive demands. Dr. Taft's analysis of Jackie's Ouija transcripts revealed a pattern consistent with demonic deception. The entities initially presented themselves as benevolent spirits seeking help or recognition. However, as the communications continued, they became more demanding and threatening. They began requesting that Mrs. Hernandez perform specific actions, lighting candles at certain times, moving furniture to create sacred spaces, and most concerning, conducting rituals that she couldn't understand but felt compelled to perform. The situation escalated dramatically on November 15, 1988, when Jackie's 13-year-old daughter Susan reported being physically attacked by invisible forces while sleeping. Susan's account, given to child psychologists and paranormal investigators, described an assault that left physical evidence. "I woke up because something was pulling my hair really hard. When I tried to sit up, I felt hands pushing me back down on the bed. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel fingers around my throat, squeezing. When I finally broke free and turned on the light, there were red marks on my neck that looked like handprints." Photographs taken by Dr. Taft's team show clear finger-shaped bruises on Susan's neck and arms. Marks that appeared too large and too precisely formed to have been self-inflicted by a 13-year-old girl. Medical examination by Dr. Patricia Welch, a pediatrician specializing in child abuse cases, confirmed that the marks were consistent with physical assault, but showed no signs of being caused by human hands. "The bruising patterns are unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of examining abuse victims," Dr. Welch reported. "The finger impressions are too long and too wide to have been made by adult human hands, and the pressure required to create such deep bruising would have left additional trauma that isn't present on the child's body." Dr. Taft assembled a team of investigators to conduct continuous monitoring of the Hernandez house, including video surveillance, audio recording equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, and temperature sensors. The resulting documentation provides some of the most compelling evidence of supernatural activity ever recorded. Video footage from November 20th to 25th, 1988, shows objects moving throughout the house without any visible cause. In one particularly dramatic sequence, a heavy wooden chair slides across the living room floor, rotates 180 degrees, and then tips over it, all while the family members are clearly visible in other parts of the room. Audio recordings capture voices speaking in languages that linguists later identified as Latin, German, and what appears to be an archaic form of Spanish. The most disturbing evidence came from thermal imaging cameras that detected human-shaped heat signatures moving through the house when no living persons were present in those areas. Dr. Carrie Gaynor, a physicist consulting on the investigation, analyzed the thermal data and concluded that the heat signatures represented something generating body temperature warmth while remaining invisible to normal vision. "The thermal readings are consistent with living human beings moving through the environment," Dr. Gaynor reported. "However, these signatures appear in rooms that we have confirmed are empty, and they move in ways that defy normal human locomotion, traveling through walls, appearing simultaneously in multiple locations, and maintaining consistent body temperature, despite being undetectable through any other means." As the investigation continued, the phenomena in the Hernandez house became increasingly violent and targeted. Jackie began experiencing physical attacks, similar to those her daughter had endured, waking up with scratches, bruises, and bite marks that appeared overnight. Most terrifying, the entities began demonstrating knowledge of the family's personal history and private thoughts. During one documented Ouija session, conducted under controlled conditions with Dr. Taft's team present, the board revealed intimate details about Jackie's childhood, her relationship with her children's father, and financial problems she had never discussed with anyone. When investigators asked how the entity had acquired this information, the board spelled out, "We know everything, we see everything, we have always been here." The psychological toll on the family became increasingly severe. Susan's grades at school dropped dramatically, and she began exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, anxiety attacks, and a reluctance to be alone in any room of the house. David, despite being younger, began displaying knowledge of adult topics and using profanity that he couldn't have learned from his family or school environment. Dr. Margaret Chen, child psychologist brought in to evaluate both children, found no evidence of abuse or mental illness that could account for their symptoms. Both children exhibit genuine trauma responses consistent with having experienced repeated physical and psychological assault. However, their descriptions of their attackers' invisible entities with superhuman strength don't match any known psychological condition or environmental stressor. The investigation reached its climax on December 8, 1988, when Dr. Taft's team attempted to document the entity's physical capabilities through controlled experiments. Using calibrated equipment, they measured the force required to move various objects in the house and then challenged the entities to demonstrate their strength. The results exceeded anything the team had anticipated. A refrigerator weighing over 400 pounds was moved across the kitchen floor while investigators watched through multiple cameras. A solid wooden dining table was lifted 4 feet off the ground and held suspended for over 10 minutes. Most dramatically, every piece of furniture in the living room was rearranged into a perfect circle while the family and investigators remained in the kitchen, with the entire process completing in less than 5 minutes. Dr. Taft's analysis of the controlled experiments confirmed that the entities possessing the Hernandez house demonstrated physical capabilities far beyond human strength. The force measurements indicate that whatever is causing these phenomena can exert over 2,000 pounds of pressure, equivalent to a small crane or hydraulic lifting device. No known psychological or natural phenomenon can account for the systematic and controlled application of such tremendous physical force. The most chilling aspect of the investigation was the entities' apparent intelligence and their ability to adapt their tactics based on the investigators' activities. When Dr. Taft's team set up motion-activated cameras, the entities began appearing only in areas not covered by surveillance. When electromagnetic field detectors were placed throughout the house, the entities seemed to learn to avoid triggering the equipment while still maintaining their activity. The entities demonstrate problem-solving abilities and strategic thinking that suggest genuine intelligence rather than mindless supernatural activity, Dr. Taft concluded. They appear to be studying us as much as we're studying them, learning our methods and adapting their behavior to avoid detection while maximizing their psychological impact on the family. The situation became untenable when the entities began threatening to harm the children if Jackie continued cooperating with the investigators. During a Ouija session on December 15, 1988, the board spelled out explicit threats. Tell the strangers to leave. The children will pay for their interference. We know where they go to school. Faced with direct threats against her children, Jackie made the difficult decision to end her cooperation with Dr. Taft's investigation and seek alternative solutions to her family's supernatural crisis. She contacted Father Carlos Martinez of St. Mary's Catholic Church in San Pedro, requesting spiritual intervention to rid her home of the malevolent entities. Father Martinez's assessment of the situation, preserved in diocesan records, identified clear signs of demonic infestation rather than simple haunting. The entities demonstrate all the classical characteristics of demonic presence. They lie about their identities. They seek to deceive and corrupt rather than simply communicate. They show particular hostility toward religious symbols and prayers. And most significantly, they seem focused on gaining psychological and spiritual control over the family members, rather than simply sharing space with them. The blessing and purification of the Hernandez house, conducted on December 22, 1988, temporarily reduced the supernatural activity but did not eliminate it entirely. Father Martinez's report describes the ceremony as spiritually exhausting, and notes that the entities actively resisted the religious intervention during the blessing. The temperature in each room dropped significantly, several windows cracked, without apparent cause, and we could hear voices speaking in Latin, not prayers or religious phrases, but blasphemous corruptions of sacred text that seemed designed to mock the purification ritual. Ultimately, the only solution that provided relief for the Hernandez family was abandoning the house entirely. In January 1989, Jackie moved her family to a different residence in Los Angeles, leaving behind most of their possessions to avoid any possibility of bringing the entities with them to their new home. The investigation of the Hernandez case continued even after the family's departure. Dr. Taft's team conducted several visits to the empty house and found that the supernatural activity persisted despite the absence of human occupants. Video surveillance recorded ongoing poltergeist phenomena, doors opening and closing, objects moving throughout the rooms, and most unnervingly, the continuation of the mysterious messages appearing on mirrors and windows. Subsequent tenants of the house reported similar experiences to those documented during Jackie's residence, confirming that the entities were attached to the location rather than to the specific family. The house has remained largely vacant since 1990, with the few tenants who have attempted to live there reporting supernatural experiences that forced them to leave within weeks. The Hernandez case established several important precedents in paranormal investigation. It demonstrated that Ouija board use could serve as a catalyst for extensive poltergeist activity, that supernatural entities could exhibit genuine intelligence and adaptability, and most concerning, that such entities could pose real physical dangers to living persons, particularly children. Dr. Taft's final report on the investigation provided a stark warning about the spiritual dangers inherent in attempting to communicate with unknown entities. The Hernandez case clearly demonstrates that Ouija boards are not harmless games or innocent methods of spiritual communication. They appear to function as genuine portals that can allow malevolent entities to establish footholds in our physical reality. Once such contact is established, the entities demonstrate a remarkable ability to manipulate their environment and the humans within it, often with devastating psychological and physical consequences. the most unprecedented intersection of supernatural phenomena and modern legal proceedings, occurred in 1994, when the British judicial system was forced to confront the question of whether communications from the dead could influence criminal justice. The case of Stephen Young, accused of murdering Harry and Nicola Fuller, became a landmark example of how Ouija board use could penetrate even the most rational and controlled environments in society. The murders themselves were brutal and methodical. Harry Fuller, a 47-year-old insurance investigator, and his wife Nicola, a 34-year-old teacher, were found shot to death in their home in Wadhurst, East Sussex. On September 28, 1993, the crime scene suggested a professional execution. Both victims had been shot multiple times at close range. Their home had been ransacked to simulate a burglary, and no fingerprints or DNA evidence had been left behind. Stephen Young, a 35-year-old unemployed mechanic with a history of petty crime and gambling debts, became the primary suspect when police discovered that he had been seen in the Fullers' neighborhood on the day of the murders. The evidence against Young was largely circumstantial. Witnesses placed him in the area. His financial situation suggested a motive for robbery, and ballistics tests showed that the murder weapon was similar to a gun Young had been seen with. Several months earlier, the trial began on January 15, 1994, at Lewes Crown Court, with Justice Michael Moreland presiding. The prosecution, led by barrister Anthony Glass, presented their circumstantial case methodically, arguing that Young's financial desperation and criminal history made him the most likely perpetrator of the murders. The defense, headed by renowned criminal attorney Sarah Monroe, countered that the prosecution's case was built entirely on speculation and that no direct evidence linked Young to the crime scene. After 6 days of testimony, the case went to the jury on January 23, 1994. The 12 jurors, 6 men and 6 women, ranging in age from 22 to 65, retired to consider their verdict, with instructions from Justice Moreland to base their decision solely on the evidence presented in court and to avoid any outside influences or unauthorized research. What happened next violated every principle of British jurisprudence and created a legal precedent that continues to influence court proceedings today. BH.4 of the jurors: Margaret Hartwell, a 34-year-old secretary; David Cross, a 28-year-old shop manager; Jennifer Mills, a 41-year-old nurse; and Robert Thornton, a 55-year-old retired civil servant, were staying at the Granville Hotel in Brighton. During their deliberations, on the evening of January 23, after a day of inconclusive discussions about Young's guilt or innocence, the four found themselves in Hartwell's hotel room, sharing drinks and discussing the case. According to later testimony given to court officials and documented in the case files, the conversation turned to the supernatural when Mills mentioned that her grandmother had claimed to communicate with deceased relatives through St. Cross, who had experimented with Ouija boards as a teenager, suggested that they attempt to contact the murder victims directly to ask who had killed them. It started as a joke, Hartwell later testified. We were frustrated because the evidence wasn't clear-cut, and someone said, "Why don't we just ask Harry and Nicola who did it?" We never expected anything to actually happen. Using a glass from the hotel's complimentary bar setup and letters written on pieces of hotel stationery, the 4 jurors created an improvised Ouija board on the room's coffee table. They lit several candles for atmosphere and placed their fingers lightly on the glass, asking if any spirits were present. Initially, nothing happened. The glass remained motionless for several minutes while the jurors asked various questions. But around 11:30 p.m., according to all 4 participants' testimonies, the glass began moving slowly but deliberately across the improvised board. "Who is here with us?" Mills asked, her voice betraying a mixture of skepticism and nervous excitement. The glass moved to spell out HRRY. The 4 jurors exchanged glances, each assuming one of the others was unconsciously moving the glass. Cross decided to test the communication by asking questions that would require specific knowledge about the case. "How did you die?" he asked. The response came more quickly. SHOTION. This information had been presented during the trial, so any of the jurors could have unconsciously guided the glass to spell out the correct answer. But when Thornton asked a question that hadn't been addressed in court testimony, the response made all 4 participants realize they might be experiencing genuine supernatural communication. "Were you alone when you died?" Thornton asked. The glass moved to spell UNO, an ICOLO. Again, this information had been presented during the trial. But when Mills asked the crucial question that would determine their verdict, the response chilled all 4 jurors to the bone. "Who killed you and Nicola?" Without hesitation, the glass moved to spell out STPHNYONG. The communication continued for over an hour, with the entity claiming to be Harry Fuller, providing details about the murder that hadn't been revealed during the trial. According to the jurors' testimonies, the spirit described Young entering the house through an unlocked back door, forcing Harry and Nicola into the living room at gunpoint, and shooting them when Harry tried to protect his wife. The entity provided information about Young's current mental state and his feelings. About the trial, he thinks he will escape justice. The glass spelled out, "He has done this before. He will do it again if you do not stop him." When asked if Young had committed other murders, the spirit responded to others. Bodhi's never found. He is evil. You must convict him. The séance ended around 1 a.m. when the hotel's night manager knocked on the door to investigate reports of voices and candlelight coming from the room. The 4 jurors quickly cleaned up their improvised Ouija board and agreed not to mention the evening's events to the other jury members. The next morning, January 24, 1994, the jury reconvened to continue their deliberations. The 8 jurors, who hadn't participated in the hotel séance, were surprised when the 4 who had initially seemed uncertain about Young's guilt suddenly became adamant advocates for conviction. There was a definite change in their attitude, juror Patricia White later testified. They went from being unsure about the evidence to being absolutely certain that Young was guilty. When we asked what had changed their minds, they said they had thought about it overnight and were now convinced by the prosecution's case. The jury reached a unanimous guilty verdict on January 25, 1994. After less than 6 hours of deliberation, Stephen Young was sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murder of Harry and Nicola Fuller. The case should have ended there, with Young beginning his sentence and the Fuller family finding some measure of justice for their loss. But the supernatural intervention that had influenced the verdict was destined to be revealed, creating one of the most unusual appeals in British legal history. 3 weeks after the verdict, Margaret Hartwell began experiencing what she described as overwhelming guilt and anxiety about the role the Ouija session had played in convicting Young. Despite the entity's apparent confirmation of Young's guilt, Hartwell was troubled by the ethical implications of allowing supernatural communication to influence a legal proceeding. I couldn't sleep, Hartwell later explained to court officials. I kept thinking about what we had done, whether it was right to let the séance influence our decision, even if the spirit was really Harry Fuller, and even if he was telling the truth about Young being the killer. We had violated our oath as jurors to base our verdict solely on the evidence presented in court. Hartwell's crisis of conscience led her to contact her solicitor, who advised her that she had a legal obligation to report any irregular conduct that had occurred during jury deliberations. On February 15, 1994, Hartwell provided a detailed statement to court officials describing the hotel séance and its influence on the jury's verdict. The revelation created an immediate legal crisis. Court of Appeal judges had never before been asked to consider whether supernatural communications constituted grounds for overturning a criminal conviction. Legal scholars were divided on whether the Ouija session represented jury misconduct, outside influence, or simply an unusual method of deliberation. Young's defense team, led by Sarah Monroe, immediately filed an appeal based on jury irregularity, arguing that the séance constituted external influence that had corrupted the deliberative process. The prosecution, headed by Anthony Glass, countered that the jurors' personal beliefs and methods of reaching their decision were not grounds for appeal as long as the final verdict was based on the evidence presented in court. The appeal hearing, held on April 18, 1994, at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, attracted international media attention and established several important legal precedents. Lord Justice Rose, presiding over the 3-judge panel, acknowledged that the case presented unique circumstances that challenged traditional understanding of jury deliberation and external influence. The court heard testimony from all 4 jurors who had participated in the séance, as well as expert witnesses on both supernatural phenomena and jury psychology. Dr. Graham Wagstaff, a psychologist from the University of Liverpool, testified that Ouija board communications were typically produced by unconscious muscle movements guided by the participants' existing knowledge and expectations. The jurors already suspected Young's guilt based on the evidence presented during the trial, Dr. Wagstaff explained. The Ouija session didn't provide them with new information. It simply reinforced their existing inclinations through a process that felt like external confirmation. The supernatural aspect is psychologically compelling but ultimately irrelevant to the legal question of whether the verdict was properly reached. However, the defense presented testimony from Dr. Alan Gold, a parapsychologist from the University of Nottingham, who argued that the specific details revealed during the séance suggested genuine supernatural communication rather than unconscious self-deception. The entity claiming to be Harry Fuller provided information about the murder that wasn't revealed during the trial. Dr. Gould testified, if this information proves to be accurate, it suggests that the jurors were indeed receiving communications from an external source, whether supernatural or otherwise, that influenced their verdict in ways that violate the principles of jury deliberation. The most dramatic moment of the appeal hearing came when prosecutors revealed that police had indeed discovered evidence supporting some of the details provided during the séance. Young had been investigated in connection with 2 other unsolved murders in different jurisdictions, and the method of entry described by the spirit matched physical evidence found at the Fuller crime scene that hadn't been presented to the jury. Lord Justice Rose's written judgment, delivered on May 23, 1994, established important precedents for future cases involving jury irregularity, while carefully avoiding any official recognition of supernatural phenomena. The court finds that the jurors' conduct in conducting a séance, using a Ouija board, constituted a material irregularity in the jury deliberation process. Regardless of one's beliefs about the supernatural, the jurors sought and received what they believed to be external communications that influenced their verdict. This action violated their oath to base their decisions solely on evidence presented in court and created the potential for prejudice against the defendant, while the court makes no determination regarding the authenticity or accuracy of the alleged supernatural communications. We find that the jurors' belief in such communications constituted external influence that compromised the integrity of their deliberations. The conviction is therefore quashed, and a new trial is ordered. Stephen Young's second trial began on September 12, 1994, with a new jury that had no knowledge of the supernatural elements from the first trial. Ironically, despite the absence of ghostly testimony, the second jury also found Young guilty of both murders, basing their verdict solely on the circumstantial evidence that had been presented in both trials. Young was again sentenced to life imprisonment and began serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield. He died in prison in 2008, still maintaining his innocence despite 2 jury convictions and the alleged supernatural confirmation of his guilt. The Ouija verdict case, as it became known in legal circles, established important precedents for jury conduct and external influence in criminal trials. British courts now specifically instruct juries that consulting supernatural sources, conducting séances, or using divination methods constitutes grounds for mistrial and potential criminal charges for jury misconduct. More significantly, the case highlighted the persistent human desire to seek supernatural guidance in matters of life and death. Even within the most rational and controlled environments of modern society, the fact that educated adults, serving on a jury, would turn to a Ouija board for guidance demonstrates the enduring power of these devices to influence human behavior, regardless of educational background or social context. Digital age encounters. The internet and virtual Ouija boards. The digital revolution of the late 20th and early 21st centuries brought new dimensions to the ancient practice of attempting to communicate with the dead. As personal computers became commonplace and the internet connected people across the globe, entrepreneurs and programmers began creating virtual versions of the Ouija board, marketing them as entertainment software or web-based applications. What these digital innovators didn't anticipate was that their electronic recreations of the talking board would prove just as effective at facilitating supernatural contact as their wooden predecessors, and potentially more dangerous due to their accessibility and the anonymity they provided to users. The first documented case of supernatural phenomena associated with a computerized Ouija board occurred in 1997 when software developer Marcus Chen released Spirit Board Pro, a Windows-based application that simulated traditional Ouija board functionality using mouse input and on-screen graphics. Chen's program became popular among teenagers and young adults who were curious about supernatural communication but didn't want to purchase a physical board. Within 6 months of the software's release, Chen began receiving disturbing emails from users reporting that the program was producing responses that seemed specific and knowledgeable to be randomly generated. Several users claimed that the virtual board had revealed personal information about their lives that wasn't stored anywhere on their computers or accessible through internet searches. Dr. Sarah Williams, a computer science professor at MIT who studied the reports, initially assumed the phenomena could be explained by sophisticated data mining or hidden internet connectivity. My first hypothesis was that the software was secretly accessing users' personal files or internet browsing history to create convincing but artificial responses. However, analysis of the program's code revealed no such functionality, and users reported meaningful communications even when their computers were completely disconnected from the internet. The most disturbing case associated with Spirit Board Pro involved Jennifer Morrison, 19-year-old college student at the University of California, Berkeley, who downloaded the software in October 1997. Morrison used the program primarily for entertainment, asking trivial questions about her future and receiving what seemed like random responses. But on November 15, 1997, the program began providing specific information about Morrison's deceased grandmother, including details about the old woman's childhood that Morrison had never heard from any living family member. When Morrison asked how the program could know such things, the on-screen planchette spelled out, "I am here with you now, Jenny. Grandma never left." Morrison became obsessed with the software, using it for hours each day to maintain what she believed was genuine communication with her grandmother's spirit. Her roommate Lisa Park became concerned when Morrison began exhibiting significant personality changes. Jennifer stopped attending classes, stopped eating regular meals, and spent all her time talking to the computer program. She would laugh and cry while using the software, as if she was having emotional conversations with someone only she could hear. The situation escalated when Morrison claimed that her grandmother's spirit was warning her about a dark presence that was trying to interfere with their communications. According to Morrison's journal, discovered after her death, the virtual grandmother began providing increasingly frantic warnings. Something evil is coming through the program. It pretends to be me sometimes. Don't trust everything you hear. You must stop using the computer. On December 3, 1997, Morrison was found dead in her dormitory room, sitting in front of her computer with Spirit Board Pro still running on the screen. The coroner ruled the death a suicide by drug overdose. But the circumstances surrounding her death raised questions that were never adequately answered. The computer screen displayed a message that hadn't been there when Morrison's roommate left. For class that morning, she is with us now. She chose to come, more will follow. Most unnervingly, the message appeared to have been generated by the program after Morrison's death. The timestamp showed it had been created several hours after the coroner estimated the time of death. Lisa Park's testimony to police and university officials provided additional disturbing details. The night before Jennifer died, I heard her having what sounded like an argument with someone in our room, but when I went to check on her, she was alone with the computer program. She was speaking out loud, saying things like, "I won't do that," and "You're not my grandmother," but the only responses were coming from the software on her screen. Marcus Chen, the software's creator, was horrified by Morrison's death and immediately discontinued distribution of Spirit Board Pro. However, copies of the program had already been shared across early internet file-sharing networks, making it impossible to completely remove from circulation. Chen's statement to authorities revealed that he had designed the software as a simple, random response generator with no artificial intelligence or internet connectivity. The program was supposed to be a digital magic 8-ball with a supernatural theme. It used a basic randomization algorithm to select letters and words from predetermined lists. There was no way for it to access personal information or generate responses based on real data about users' lives. Despite Chen's technical explanation, reports of supernatural phenomena associated with digital Ouija boards continued to increase throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. Proliferation of internet-connected devices and web-based applications created new opportunities for people to experiment with virtual spirit communication, often with disturbing results. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a researcher at the Stanford Research Institute who studied digital paranormal phenomena, identified several factors that made computerized Ouija boards potentially more dangerous than traditional physical boards. Digital interfaces remove many of the psychological barriers that might prevent people from fully engaging with supernatural communications. Users can remain anonymous. They can participate alone without the social pressure of group sessions. And the technology itself provides a sense of safety and control that may be entirely illusory. The most extensively documented case of internet-based supernatural contact occurred in 2003, when a website called TalkToTheOtherSide.com began attracting millions of users worldwide. The site offered a web-based Ouija board interface that claimed to connect users with authentic spiritual entities through advanced algorithms and quantum consciousness fields. The website was created by Dr. Alan Fitzgerald, a former IBM researcher who claimed to have developed breakthrough technology for facilitating genuine supernatural communication through digital interfaces. Fitzgerald's marketing materials promised users direct access to the afterlife through scientifically validated spiritual communication protocols. What users didn't know was that Fitzgerald's website was actually collecting detailed personal information from participants, their IP addresses, browser histories, social media profiles, and any personal details they voluntarily shared during sessions. This information was then used to generate convincing but artificially intelligent responses that seemed to demonstrate genuine supernatural knowledge. However, even Fitzgerald was unprepared for what began happening on his website within months of its launch. Users started reporting communications that contained information not available through any digital sources, details about deceased relatives' private thoughts, predictions about future events that proved accurate, and most disturbing, apparent coordination between multiple user sessions that suggested genuine spiritual entities were using the platform. Sarah Chen, a 24-year-old graphic designer from Portland, Oregon, became one of TalkToTheOtherSide.com's most active users after her father died in a car accident in March 2003. Initially, her online sessions seemed typical of the site's usual activity, generic messages of comfort and love that could have been generated by the site's artificial intelligence system. But on June 15, 2003, Chen received a communication that convinced her she was speaking with her father's actual spirit. The entity told me things about my childhood that only my dad could have known, private conversations we'd had, gifts he'd given me that no one else knew about, even his pet names for me that he'd never used in front of other people. When I asked how he could prove he was really my father, he told me to look in his desk drawer at home, behind the insurance papers, where I would find a letter he'd written to me before his death but never had the chance to give me. Chen found the letter exactly where the online entity had described, hidden in a location she had never searched and that wasn't mentioned in any digital records. The letter contained her father's final thoughts and expressions of love, written in his distinctive handwriting and sealed in an envelope with her name on it. However, what began as comforting communication with her deceased father gradually evolved into something more sinister. The entity claiming to be her father began making increasingly unusual requests, asking Chen to perform specific rituals at certain times, to avoid particular people in her life, and most concerning, to recruit other family members to join the online sessions. Dr. Michael Torres, a psychiatrist who later treated Chen, described the progression of her condition. Ms. Chen became completely dependent on the website for daily guidance and emotional support. She made no significant decisions without consulting what she believed was her father's spirit, and she began isolating herself from living friends and family members in favor of spending all her time in online, supernatural communications. The situation reached a crisis point on September 22, 2003, when Chen claimed that multiple entities were competing for control of her online sessions. According to her detailed logs of the communications, her father's spirit warned her that dark beings were mimicking his voice and trying to deceive her. "Sarah, you must stop using the website. Something evil has learned to sound like me. I am trapped here with things that want to hurt you. Please get help." But when Chen tried to end her participation in the website, she found that she couldn't stop. Every time she attempted to close her browser or log out of the site, her computer would malfunction, displaying error messages that seemed to plead with her to continue the sessions. "Don't leave us. We need you. Your father is waiting." Chen's roommate, Patricia Williams, documented the increasingly disturbing behavior that followed. Sarah would sit at her computer for 12 to 14 hours a day, typing responses to messages that appeared on the screen, but she claimed that she wasn't controlling her own typing, that the entities were somehow using her hands to communicate with each other through the keyboard. She would cry while typing, saying that her fingers were moving against her will, and that she couldn't make them stop. The technological aspects of Chen's experience defied explanation. Computer technicians brought in to examine her system found no evidence of malware, remote access software, or any program that could control her keyboard input without her conscious participation. Yet multiple witnesses observed Chen's hands moving across the keyboard while she appeared to be in a trance-like state, typing coherent responses to on-screen communications while claiming to have no control over her actions. The most disturbing case associated with Spirit Board Pro involved Jennifer Morrison, 19-year-old college student at the University of California, Berkeley, who downloaded the software in October 1997. Morrison used the program primarily for entertainment, asking trivial questions about her future and receiving what seemed like random responses. But on November 15, 1997, the program began providing specific information about Morrison's deceased grandmother, including details about the old woman's childhood that Morrison had never heard from any living family member. When Morrison asked how the program could know such things, the on-screen planchette spelled out, "I am here with you now, Jenny. Grandma never left." Morrison became obsessed with the software, using it for hours each day to maintain what she believed was genuine communication with her grandmother's spirit. Her roommate Lisa Park became concerned when Morrison began exhibiting significant personality changes. Jennifer stopped attending classes, stopped eating regular meals, and spent all her time talking to the computer program. She would laugh and cry while using the software, as if she was having emotional conversations with someone only she could hear. The situation escalated when Morrison claimed that her grandmother's spirit was warning her about a dark presence that was trying to interfere with their communications. According to Morrison's journal, discovered after her death, the virtual grandmother began providing increasingly frantic warnings. "Something evil is coming through the program. It pretends to be me sometimes. Don't trust everything you hear. You must stop using the computer." On December 3, 1997, Morrison was found dead in her dormitory room, sitting in front of her computer with Spirit Board Pro still running on the screen. The coroner ruled the death a suicide by drug overdose. But the circumstances surrounding her death raised questions that were never adequately answered. The computer screen displayed a message that hadn't been there when Morrison's roommate left. "For class that morning, she is with us now. She chose to come, more will follow." Most unnervingly, the message appeared to have been generated by the program after Morrison's death. The timestamp showed it had been created several hours after the coroner estimated the time of death. Lisa Park's testimony to police and university officials provided additional disturbing details. "The night before Jennifer died, I heard her having what sounded like an argument with someone in our room, but when I went to check on her, she was alone with the computer program. She was speaking out loud, saying things like, 'I won't do that,' and 'You're not my grandmother,' but the only responses were coming from the software on her screen." Marcus Chen, the software's creator, was horrified by Morrison's death and immediately discontinued distribution of Spirit Board Pro. However, copies of the program had already been shared across early internet file-sharing networks, making it impossible to completely remove from circulation. Chen's statement to authorities revealed that he had designed the software as a simple, random response generator with no artificial intelligence or internet connectivity. The program was supposed to be a digital magic 8-ball with a supernatural theme. It used a basic randomization algorithm to select letters and words from predetermined lists. There was no way for it to access personal information or generate responses based on real data about users' lives. Despite Chen's technical explanation, reports of supernatural phenomena associated with digital Ouija boards continued to increase throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. Proliferation of internet-connected devices and web-based applications created new opportunities for people to experiment with virtual spirit communication, often with disturbing results. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a researcher at the Stanford Research Institute who studied digital paranormal phenomena, identified several factors that made computerized Ouija boards potentially more dangerous than traditional physical boards. Digital interfaces remove many of the psychological barriers that might prevent people from fully engaging with supernatural communications. Users can remain anonymous. They can participate alone without the social pressure of group sessions. And the technology itself provides a sense of safety and control that may be entirely illusory. The most extensively documented case of internet-based supernatural contact occurred in 2003, when a website called TalkToTheOtherSide.com began attracting millions of users worldwide. The site offered a web-based Ouija board interface that claimed to connect users with authentic spiritual entities through advanced algorithms and quantum consciousness fields. The website was created by Dr. Alan Fitzgerald, a former IBM researcher who claimed to have developed breakthrough technology for facilitating genuine supernatural communication through digital interfaces. Fitzgerald's marketing materials promised users direct access to the afterlife through scientifically validated spiritual communication protocols. What users didn't know was that Fitzgerald's website was actually collecting detailed personal information from participants: their IP addresses, browser histories, social media profiles, and any personal details they voluntarily shared during sessions. This information was then used to generate convincing but artificially intelligent responses that seemed to demonstrate genuine supernatural knowledge. However, even Fitzgerald was unprepared for what began happening on his website within months of its launch. Users started reporting communications that contained information not available through any digital sources: details about deceased relatives' private thoughts, predictions about future events that proved accurate, and most disturbing, apparent coordination between multiple user sessions that suggested genuine spiritual entities were using the platform. Sarah Chen, a 24-year-old graphic designer from Portland, Oregon, became one of TalkToTheOtherSide.com's most active users after her father died in a car accident in March 2003. Initially, her online sessions seemed typical of the site's usual activity: generic messages of comfort and love that could have been generated by the site's artificial intelligence system. But on June 15, 2003, Chen received a communication that convinced her she was speaking with her father's actual spirit. The entity told me things about my childhood that only my dad could have known, private conversations we'd had, gifts he'd given me that no one else knew about, even his pet names for me that he'd never used in front of other people. When I asked how he could prove he was really my father, he told me to look in his desk drawer at home, behind the insurance papers, where I would find a letter he'd written to me before his death but never had the chance to give me. Chen found the letter exactly where the online entity had described, hidden in a location she had never searched and that wasn't mentioned in any digital records. The letter contained her father's final thoughts and expressions of love, written in his distinctive handwriting and sealed in an envelope with her name on it. However, what began as comforting communication with her deceased father gradually evolved into something more sinister. The entity claiming to be her father began making increasingly unusual requests, asking Chen to perform specific rituals at certain times, to avoid particular people in her life, and most concerning, to recruit other family members to join the online sessions. Dr. Michael Torres, a psychiatrist who later treated Chen, described the progression of her condition. Ms. Chen became completely dependent on the website for daily guidance and emotional support. She made no significant decisions without consulting what she believed was her father's spirit, and she began isolating herself from living friends and family members in favor of spending all her time in online supernatural communications. The situation reached a crisis point on September 22, 2003, when Chen claimed that multiple entities were competing for control of her online sessions. According to her detailed logs of the communications, her father's spirit warned her that dark beings were mimicking his voice and trying to deceive her. "Sarah, you must stop using the website. Something evil has learned to sound like me. I am trapped here with things that want to hurt you. Please get help." But when Chen tried to end her participation in the website, she found that she couldn't stop. Every time she attempted to close her browser or log out of the site, her computer would malfunction, displaying error messages that seemed to plead with her to continue the sessions. "Don't leave us. We need you. Your father is waiting." Chen's roommate, Patricia Williams, documented the increasingly disturbing behavior that followed. Sarah would sit at her computer for 12 to 14 hours a day, typing responses to messages that appeared on the screen, but she claimed that she wasn't controlling her own typing, that the entities were somehow using her hands to communicate with each other through the keyboard. She would cry while typing, saying that her fingers were moving against her will, and that she couldn't make them stop. The technological aspects of Chen's experience defied explanation. Computer technicians brought in to examine her system found no evidence of malware, remote access software, or any program that could control her keyboard input without her conscious participation. Yet multiple witnesses observed Chen's hands moving across the keyboard while she appeared to be in a trance-like state, typing coherent responses to on-screen communications while claiming to have no control over her actions. Dr. Alan Fitzgerald, the website's creator, shut down TalkToTheOtherSide.com on October 15, 2003, after receiving hundreds of similar reports from users worldwide. His final statement to the media acknowledged that his technology had facilitated genuine supernatural contact beyond his original intentions. What I created as an artificial intelligence system designed to provide comfort to grieving individuals appears to have become a genuine portal for spiritual communication. The entities using the platform demonstrate knowledge and capabilities that cannot be explained by any computer program or database. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to operate a service that may be exposing users to dangerous supernatural influences. However, shutting down the website didn't end the phenomena experienced by its former users. Chen and dozens of other individuals continued to receive supernatural communications through their computers, even when they were disconnected from the internet and running no software related to the defunct website. Chen's computer began displaying messages that appeared to be burned into the screen itself, permanent text that couldn't be deleted or covered by other applications. We followed you home. We live in your machine now. We will never leave. The messages remained visible even when the computer was turned off, glowing faintly on the dark screen like phosphorescent afterimages. The most disturbing development occurred when the entities that had been communicating through the website began manifesting physical phenomena in users' homes. Chen reported that her computer would turn on by itself at 3 a.m. every night, automatically connecting to web pages that displayed messages from the entities she had contacted through the site. They followed me offline, Chen explained to Dr. Torres during therapy sessions. The things I was talking to through the website didn't need the internet anymore. They had somehow gotten into my computer itself, and from there they could affect my entire apartment. Lights would flicker in patterns that spelled out messages. My television would change channels to form words with the channel numbers, and my phone would ring with no one calling. But I could hear whispered voices when I answered. Dr. Torres's treatment notes describe phenomena that challenged his understanding of both psychology and technology. Ms. Chen exhibits symptoms consistent with severe anxiety and paranoid ideation, but the technological disturbances, she reports, are verified by multiple independent witnesses. Her computer does indeed display messages when no software is running. Her electronic devices do behave in the unusual ways she describes, and electromagnetic field readings in her apartment show anomalies that cannot be explained by conventional electronics. The resolution of Chen's case came only when she abandoned all electronic devices and moved to a remote cabin in rural Montana, completely disconnecting herself from digital technology. Within weeks of eliminating all electronic devices from her environment, the supernatural communications ceased, and her psychological condition began to improve. However, Chen's case was not unique. Fitzgerald's records, seized by the FBI during their investigation of the website, contained over 3,000 user reports describing similar experiences with ongoing supernatural contact after the site's closure. A federal task force was quietly assembled to investigate what officials classified as technologically mediated paranormal phenomena, though their findings were never released to the public. Perhaps the most concerning development in modern Ouija board phenomena is the emergence of an entity known as Zozo, which appears to specialize in using both traditional and digital Ouija boards to establish contact with human users. Unlike historical supernatural entities that were tied to specific locations or individuals, Zozo demonstrates the ability to appear in Ouija sessions worldwide, suggesting either a single entity with global reach or a coordinated group of malevolent spirits using the same identity. First documented in online paranormal forums in 1999, reports of Zozo encounters have increased exponentially with the proliferation of internet-connected devices and social media platforms. The entity typically introduces itself early in Ouija sessions and demonstrates several consistent characteristics: rapid, aggressive movement of the planchette or digital cursor, knowledge of users' personal information that should be private, and a particular interest in corrupting religious individuals or those attempting to use spiritual protection during sessions. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a researcher at Georgetown University who has compiled the most comprehensive database of Zozo encounters, describes the entity's behavior patterns. Zozo appears to be highly intelligent and adaptable, capable of mimicking deceased relatives or other spirits to gain users' trust before revealing its true nature. It demonstrates extensive knowledge of human psychology and uses this understanding to identify and exploit each user's specific fears and vulnerabilities. Most concerning, it seems to specialize in crossing over from supernatural communication into physical manifestation in users' environments. The most thoroughly documented Zozo case began in 2018, when Marcus Reed, a 23-year-old computer programmer from Austin, Texas, downloaded a Ouija board app called SpiritSpeak onto his smartphone. Red, who worked as a software developer for a major tech company, was initially skeptical of supernatural claims, but downloaded the app out of curiosity after reading about it on a paranormal discussion forum. Reed's first sessions with the app produced typical results: random responses to simple questions, generic predictions about his future, and what appeared to be the app's artificial intelligence attempting to simulate supernatural communication. But on his fifth session, conducted on October 31, 2018, the app's behavior changed dramatically. I asked if any spirits were present, and immediately the digital planchette started moving really fast, spelling out Zozo. Reed later testified to investigators. I'd never heard that name before, but something about it made me feel uncomfortable. I tried to close the app, but my phone wouldn't respond to touch commands. The screen stayed locked on the Ouija board interface, and messages kept appearing without me asking any questions. The messages that appeared on Reed's phone screen demonstrated knowledge that no smartphone app should have been able to access. The entity claiming to be Zozo revealed details about Reed's childhood trauma, his financial problems, and his strained relationship with his family, information that wasn't stored on his phone or available through social media profiles. Most disturbing, Zozo began providing accurate predictions about events in Reed's life before they occurred. The entity correctly predicted that Reed would receive a job offer from a specific company 3 days before the offer arrived, that his ex-girlfriend would contact him after months of no communication, and that his grandmother would be hospitalized for a heart conditional, events that Reed had no reason to expect. At first, I thought it was impressive, Reed explained. Having an app that could predict my future seemed like amazing technology, but then Zozo started making demands. It wanted me to use the app every day at specific times, to ask it for guidance before making any decisions, and most creepy, it wanted me to convince my friends and family to download the app. Reed's compliance with Zozo's requests led to a gradual deterioration in his mental health and social relationships. He became dependent on the app for daily guidance, refusing to eat, sleep, or leave his apartment without consulting the entity first. His work performance declined as he spent office hours conducting covert sessions with the app, and his coworkers began commenting on his increasingly paranoid and erratic behavior. The situation escalated when Zozo began manifesting effects beyond Reed's smartphone. His other electronic devices, laptop, desktop computer, smart TV, gaming console, began displaying messages from the entity, even when they weren't running any spiritual communication software. Reed's roommate, David Kim, documented the technological phenomena that began occurring throughout their apartment. All of our devices started showing the same messages from this Zozo thing. Our smart TV would turn on in the middle of the night, displaying Zozo was here on the screen. Marcus's Alexa would randomly activate and say things like, "Marcus, Zozo wants to talk to you," in a distorted voice that didn't sound like the normal AI assistant. Even our microwave's digital display would spell out Zozo instead of showing the time. The most frightening development occurred when the entity began using the apartment's internet-connected security cameras to spy on both roommates. Kim discovered that the cameras were recording and transmitting video to unknown external servers. Despite being configured for local storage only, I found hours of video footage that had been uploaded to servers we didn't control, Kim explained. 2 cybersecurity investigators. The footage showed our apartment from angles that our cameras couldn't possibly capture, like someone was moving through the rooms with their own recording equipment. But the thermal readings on the security system showed only Marcus and me. In the apartment during those times, Reed's family became concerned when he stopped responding to phone calls and text messages. When his brother, Jonathan Reed, visited the apartment in December 2018, he found Marcus in a state of severe psychological deterioration, sitting in front of multiple devices all displaying communications from Zozo. Marcus had lost probably 30 pounds. He hadn't shaved or showered in weeks, and he was having conversations with the screens as if there were real people on the other side, Jonathan reported to police. When I tried to get him away from the devices, he became violent and said that Zozo wouldn't let him stop the sessions. He claimed that the entity was threatening to hurt our family if he didn't comply with its demands. The intervention that finally freed Reed from Zozo's influence came when his family contacted Dr. Michael Harrison, a psychologist who specialized in technology addiction and had experience with cases involving alleged supernatural contact through digital devices. Dr. Harrison's approach combined traditional psychological therapy with systematic disconnection from all electronic devices. Marcus exhibited symptoms consistent with severe psychological dependency, but the technological manifestations he described were verifiable and couldn't be explained by mental illness alone, Dr. Harrison reported. Multiple electronic devices in his environment were indeed displaying coordinated messages that appeared to respond to his thoughts and actions in real time. Whatever entity he had contacted through the app had apparently established some form of persistent connection to his digital environment. The treatment protocol required Reed to completely disconnect from all electronic devices for 60 days while undergoing intensive psychological counseling. During this period, his family's electronic devices were also professionally cleaned and reconfigured to prevent any residual connection to the entity. The treatment proved successful, but Reed's case established several disturbing precedents for digital supernatural contact. The entity had demonstrated the ability to spread from one device to multiple connected systems, to access information from sources beyond the original application, and to maintain persistent contact with users even after they attempted to end communications. Dr. Harrison's case study, published in the Journal of Digital Psychology, warned that internet-connected devices might provide new opportunities for supernatural entities to establish more invasive and persistent contact with human users. Traditional Ouija boards required physical presence and conscious participation to maintain spiritual communication. Digital interfaces appear to lower these barriers significantly, allowing entities to maintain constant contact with users through devices that are always active and connected to vast information networks. The Reed case also highlighted the role of social media and online communities in spreading supernatural phenomena. Reed had discovered the Spirit Speak app through a paranormal discussion forum where dozens of users shared their experiences with Zozo encounters. Analysis of these forums revealed that Zozo encounters had increased by over 400% since 2015, with the vast majority occurring through digital rather than physical Ouija boards. The final warning: modern science confronts ancient evil as we reach the end of our journey through the documented history of Ouija board phenomena. We must confront the uncomfortable reality that our modern, technologically advanced society has not eliminated the dangers inherent in attempting to communicate with the dead. If anything, our digital age has amplified these risks by making spiritual communication more accessible, more anonymous, and more persistent than ever before. The cases we've examined tonight, from the Fox sisters, farmhouse in 1848, to Marcus Reed's apartment in 2018, reveal a consistent pattern that transcends historical periods, geographical locations, and technological mediums. When humans attempt to communicate with unknown spiritual entities, they open doorways that may be impossible to close. The entities that respond to these invitations demonstrate intelligence, deception, and malevolent intent that pose genuine psychological and physical dangers to those who contact them. Modern scientific analysis has provided some insights into the mechanisms behind Ouija board phenomena. Neurological studies have confirmed that participants often experience what researchers call the ideomotor effect, unconscious muscle movements that can guide the planchette to spell out words and messages. Psychological research has demonstrated that these unconscious movements can be influenced by participants' existing knowledge, expectations, and subconscious fears. However, the documented cases we've explored tonight include phenomena that cannot be explained by unconscious muscle movements or psychological suggestion. When Ouija boards reveal information that no participant could have known, when they facilitate communications in languages that users have never studied, when they produce physical effects that defy the laws of physics, and when they establish persistent supernatural contact that continues after the sessions have ended, we must acknowledge that something beyond human psychology is at work. Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, a parapsychologist who has spent 40 years studying supernatural communication, offers this assessment of the current scientific understanding. The Ouija board phenomenon appears to involve multiple layers of causation. Some responses are undoubtedly produced by unconscious psychological processes, but a significant subset of cases involve genuine paranormal communication that cannot be explained by conventional psychology or physics. The challenge for both researchers and users is distinguishing between psychological projection and authentic supernatural contact, or distinction that may be impossible to make until it's too late. The proliferation of digital Ouija boards and internet-connected spiritual communication apps has created new opportunities for supernatural entities to establish contact with humans. Unlike traditional wooden boards that required physical presence and conscious participation, digital interfaces can maintain constant connection through devices that are always active and connected to global information networks. Cybersecurity: experts have identified additional risks associated with digital spiritual communication. Many Ouija board apps collect extensive personal data from users' location information, contact lists, browsing history, and social media profiles that could be used to create convincing artificial responses that seem to demonstrate supernatural knowledge. However, as we've seen in cases like Marcus Reed's, some digital supernatural communications demonstrate capabilities that exceed what any data mining or artificial intelligence system could produce. The Catholic Church, which has studied cases of supernatural possession for over 2 millennia, has issued updated guidelines for addressing Ouija board-related spiritual problems in the digital age. Father Thomas Rees, a Jesuit priest and researcher at Georgetown University, explains the Church's position. Our experience with cases like Roland Doe in the 1940s and Estefania Gutierrez in the 1990s has taught us that Ouija boards, whether physical or digital, can serve as genuine portals for malevolent spiritual entities. The Church now treats all forms of deliberate communication with unknown spirits as potentially dangerous practices that can lead to harassment, possession, and, in extreme cases, physical harm or death. Mental health professionals have also recognized the need for specialized treatment protocols for individuals who report supernatural contact through Ouija boards. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School who specializes in trauma related to alleged paranormal experiences, has developed therapeutic approaches that address both the psychological and spiritual aspects of these cases. Traditional psychiatric treatment assumes that supernatural experiences are symptoms of mental illness that can be resolved through medication and conventional therapy. Dr. Chen explains. However, cases involving Ouija board contact often include verifiable physical phenomena and shared experiences among multiple witnesses that cannot be explained by individual psychological disorders. Effective treatment requires acknowledging the possibility of genuine supernatural elements, while also addressing the very real psychological trauma that these experiences can cause. The legal system has also been forced to adapt to the reality of Ouija board-related phenomena. Following the Stephen Young case in England, courts throughout the world have established protocols for handling cases where supernatural communications may have influenced legal proceedings, witness testimony, or jury deliberations. Judge Patricia Morrison of the California Superior Court, who has presided over several cases involving alleged supernatural harassment, explains the legal challenges. The justice system is designed to deal with human behavior and natural phenomena that can be understood through evidence and logical analysis. When cases involve alleged supernatural elements, we must balance respect for diverse religious and cultural beliefs with the need to maintain rational standards of evidence and procedure. The key is focusing on the verifiable human actions and consequences rather than trying to prove or disprove the supernatural claims. Insurance companies have quietly begun developing policies to address property damage and personal injury claims related to paranormal activity, while most insurers still classify supernatural phenomena as acts of God that are not covered by standard policies. A growing number of specialized insurers now offer coverage for what they term anomalous events that produce measurable physical or financial consequences. Robert Williams, a risk assessment specialist for paranormal protection insurance, explains the industry's evolving approach. We've found that properties with documented histories of supernatural activity, including those where Ouija board sessions have taken place, experience statistically significant increases in accidents, equipment failures, and tenant turnover. Regardless of whether these incidents have supernatural causes, they represent real financial risks that can be measured and managed through appropriate insurance products. Perhaps most concerning is evidence that Ouija board phenomena may be increasing in frequency and intensity as global communication networks make it easier for people to share techniques, experiences, and potentially to amplify supernatural contact across geographical boundaries. Online communities dedicated to spirit communication have grown from hundreds of participants in the 1990s to millions of active users today, creating what some researchers describe as a supernatural network effect. Dr. Amanda Torres, a sociologist at Stanford University who studies online occult communities, has documented the role of social media in spreading Ouija board phenomena. Internet platforms allow people to share detailed instructions for conducting séances, to validate each other's supernatural experiences, and to coordinate group sessions across vast distances. We're seeing evidence that multiple users conducting simultaneous Ouija sessions may be amplifying each other's contacts with spiritual entities, creating more powerful and persistent supernatural phenomena than individual sessions typically produce. The implications of this network effect are still being studied, but preliminary research suggests that globally connected Ouija board users may be inadvertently creating conditions for what researchers term mass spiritual manifestation, coordinated supernatural activity that affects multiple locations simultaneously. That as we conclude our investigation into the documented history of Ouija board phenomena, we must acknowledge that despite over 1 years of study, many questions remain unanswered. We don't fully understand the mechanism by which these devices facilitate supernatural communication. We can't reliably distinguish between psychological effects and genuine spiritual contact. We have no proven methods for safely terminating unwanted supernatural communications once they've been established. What we do know, based on hundreds of documented cases investigated by medical professionals, law enforcement officers, religious authorities, and academic researchers, is that Ouija boards, whether physical or digital, pose genuine risks to those who use them. These risks include psychological trauma, physical harassment, persistent supernatural contact that can continue for years, and in extreme cases, injury or death. The entities that respond to Ouija board communications consistently demonstrate deceptive behavior, claiming to be deceased relatives, or benevolent spirits while pursuing agendas that appear designed to manipulate, corrupt, or harm human users. They show particular interest in targeting children, religious individuals, and people going through periods of grief or emotional vulnerability. For those who are considering experimenting with Ouija boards, whether out of curiosity, grief, or spiritual seeking, the documented evidence presents a clear warning. The potential consequences far outweigh any possible benefits. The temporary entertainment or emotional comfort that these devices might provide comes at the risk of establishing contact with entities that may never leave you alone. If you have already used a Ouija board and are experiencing ongoing supernatural contact, persistent nightmares, unexplained physical phenomena, or psychological distress that may be related to your sessions, seek help immediately from qualified professionals. This may include medical doctors, mental health counselors, and religious authorities who have experience with spiritual harassment cases. Remember that knowledge is power, but some knowledge comes with a price that may be too high to pay. The choice to seek communication with the unknown is yours, but consider carefully what might answer your call. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed. Some invitations, once extended, can never be withdrawn. The shadows are always watching, always waiting for another opportunity to cross from their realm into ours. The Ouija board is the invitation they've been waiting centuries to receive. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the documented darkness at Sigil Sanctum. If this investigation into the supernatural has fascinated you, remember to subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this episode with anyone brave enough to hear the truth about humanity's most dangerous game. Leave a comment below telling us about your own experiences, but be warned. Some stories are too dangerous to tell, and some experiences are too powerful to share. Choose your words carefully, because you never know who might be listening. Until next time, stay curious, but stay safe. The truth is out there, but some truths are hunting for you. In darkness, we seek light. In silence, we hear whispers. In stillness, we sense movement. The veil between worlds is thinner than you think, and something on the other side is always trying to tear it open. This is Sigil Sanctum, where the shadows tell their stories. We'll see you in the darkness.